Let's rock and roll.
All right. Can you just very briefly go over what your childhood was like?
Oh, well, I grew up on a small farm, a cotton farm in West Tennessee, about 60 miles out of Memphis, and had all those comforts of a farm family as far as that goes. We had black and white TV that had 3 fuzzy channels, and we worked the fields and everything along with white kids and black kids, and we were sharecroppers with my grandfather.
And did you watch wrestling growing up?
I started watching wrestling when I was probably 10, 12 years old. That was when the channel started to come in clear, and they didn't have the wrestling down out of Memphis early in my life, back when I was born in 53. So probably in the late 50s was when it was big on TV in Memphis, and we had the signal that far out. So, and it was Nick Goulas that was running the operation back then, a notorious promoter from Nashville. But I would start to watch it because he would sell this thing. It's the biggest card ever signed for Memphis. I mean, we got Jackie Fargo, we got all these superstars. It's the biggest event you're ever going to see. And I was really taken away by that big event, which was not big at all back then. But yeah, I was a fan.
And did you have aspirations to become a wrestler in those days?
Not really. I wanted to be in sports and entertainment. I wanted to be a pro sports. I would go out and throw a ball against the side of the house, a rubber ball, and have it bounce back, and I'd catch it and throw it back again. And then I sold little seeds, flower seeds, to people to buy one of those net things that had springs where you throw the ball and it bounce it back to you, and then you catch pop-ups. And then in the wintertime, I would dress up in my little football gear and go out and kick a football up in the air and run and catch it. I wanted to be, and I always wanted to be in entertainment. Really radio more than in movies. I didn't care about movies. But yeah, my aspirations were to be, to someday leave that cotton farm in West Tennessee and never look back. And I eventually did that.
So how was your amateur sports career? Obviously, you must have played it.
Amateur sports, I was never a standout guy or one of the. I didn't hit the ball very far. I was not. I could get solid base hits and things like that. I was a pretty good pitcher in Little League. I never hit any kids. I was pretty good at that. I didn't throw the ball hard and fast. And then I moved on up to the next level. They called Babe Ruth League for 13-year-old to 16-year-olds. And I was in Little League. I was a pitcher and a catcher. But there they put me in center field because I could run fast and I could catch the ball. I never dropped a pop-up. So, and I was never a great hitter. Then I played elementary basketball, and it was kind of the old cliche, white men can't jump. So I was not a great basketball player, but just average. And we didn't have wrestling in my high school. And then I played junior high and high school football. Was not a big standout because we had changed of coaches 3 times in my 4 years. And anytime you change coaches that often, they bring in all their new theories and all their new offense and defense. So our whole team, which was a good team, could have been a good team, ended up being a flop.
And is it true that after you finished college that you were actually a high school football coach for 2 years? Yeah,
I never really thought about getting into coaching when I went to college. When I was in high school, I took trade classes. I learned how to cut rafters and build houses and things of that nature. I always thought I might be in carpentry or something like that. In fact, I was a runner-up in the state championship for a rafter cutting contest my senior year in high school. And I didn't have a background really for college, and I barely got in the entrance exam by 1 point. The entrance exam, I think, at that time was 14 or 15 on what they call the ACT test, and I got in, it was 16, and I got in with a 15, so I was 1 point, and they grandfathered you in. If you was only 1 or 2 points below, you were able to get into college, and I did, but I was on probation. So I had to pass all my classes the first year to get off the probation. And once you pass the first year, then the test score didn't matter. But I got into health and physical education in college, was my major, and from there it led into coaching when I graduated.
And how did you go from that to pro wrestling?
I had friends, and of course I had 3 cousins at the time. Carl Fergie, his brother was Gary Fergie, and they were my mother's her brother. They were his sons. they had started wrestling, and of course Jerry Lawler, his mother was my mother's sister, and the Fergie boys were first cousins to him by way of their father, and they were doing it, and I never really thought about it until one of my college guys that I hung around with, and some of the guys that were in the health and physical education, they were all athletes. They ran track, or they were basketball or football players. And then we started a weightlifting team, and a couple of guys said, "Man, you ought to join us some Sunday night. We go up and do this wrestling thing." And I said, "I never even cared about it." "Hey, yeah, but your cousin Jerry Lawler, he's in charge in Memphis, and if we can get on TV and everything, it'd be fun for us." And then they got on TV, and I thought, "Gosh, if they're on TV and heck, Lawler was an artist and drew pictures." I said, "Heck, I can do that. I mean, I'm an athlete." So I went and trained with them, and next thing you know, I trained for 9 months and coached for a year and a half, and I thought, well, heck, I'm ready to go. And then I gave up my coaching job and gave my resignation in the middle of the year, thinking I was going to Mobile, and the Mobile territory closed before I could get there. So then I was left without a job.
So just going back to your training a bit, what was the training like in those days to become a pro wrestler?
Oh, it was grueling. It was painful, and I was telling someone not so long ago that they said, "What's the worst injuries you ever had?" And we'll talk about the finger injury later on and all the other injuries, but the worst ones I had was in the training school, where just going there and being thrown around like a sack of potatoes, and having Coco drop kick me 20 times and me stand there and take it in the face and the jaw and the knees and whatever. And then we had these big weightlifter boys that were from my college. They were there, and of course they were the strong men, and they'd slam me down and drop legs on me, and they didn't know what they were doing. And then we learned amateur wrestling along with it, because back then, 30 years ago, if you didn't know some amateur wrestling, you could be what we call eaten up in the ring by an older guy that knew amateur wrestling. They would take you down, tie you up, and make you squeal. I mean, you really had to fight back.
So how would you say the veterans treated you when you were first breaking into the business?
Normal for a young guy. I mean, they beat me up, but I had a really good trainer in Herb Welch from the famous Welch family. They ran the wrestling all over the Mid-South. They had part of Florida. They had part of Atlanta. They had the Gulf Coast in Mobile. They had Alabama. They had Tennessee. They had part of Kentucky. They had part of Bruiser's territory in Louisville and Evansville, Indiana. And so just by being trained by someone of that stature gave me, like Lou Thesz, the first time I wrestled him, he said, "Who trained you?" And I said, "Herb Welch." He said, "Herb's a good guy. He's a good trainer." But in the meantime, when we went out to the ring, Herb had already told me, "Be careful of this guy now." And I said, "What do I need to know?" He says, "Well, he's going to back you against the ropes. He's going to give you this punch with an elbow to the head and to the side of the jaw." And he said, just be ready for it. And he's going to wrist lock you and take you over. So make sure you get your wrist on your stomach, because he can pull your shoulder out of socket. And he's going to do this thing and this. And he did it all exactly like my trainer had told me. But I knew how to reverse these holds. Once he had me down, then I would reverse it, and he'd reverse it, put it back on me. We came out of the match, and he says, "You've been trained pretty good. How long you been doing this?" It's 9 months. And he told the promoter, he said, "Next month when I come back, I want to wrestle this guy again."
Wow, what was that like, knowing how huge?
Oh, I was scared to death. I mean, this was Lou Thesz, and we were in like an outlaw territory, and he drove down from St. Louis because he was a big star, and this little town was about 100 miles out of St. Louis, and it was about 100 miles out of Memphis. So I would drive there, and Coco would. Coco and I trained together. We'd drive there every Saturday night and wrestle, and I'd go back and teach school on Monday through Friday, and then every Saturday I'd go wrestle, and every Sunday I'd drive back to Dyersburg, Tennessee, and train again. I kept training after I had my matches, and that's I think a key part that some of the young fellas miss now is they get trained, and then they don't ever go back to training school. I think you really need to go back again, and I did. I went back and kept going back to training school even after I'd had matches, because having 1 or 2 matches doesn't mean you know anything. I mean, it took me 5 years before I went, gosh, I've been doing this all wrong.
And you called yourself Dynamite Wayne Ferris when you started. Right?
I think that's the name that Henry Rogers was the promoter, and I remember him so vividly because there was a guy, and he might have been on Canadian TV later in his life before he passed away, Slim Whitman. He was one of the first guys who did that 1-800 call in and buy one of his cassette tapes or whatever. Back then it was cassettes or whatever, bigger. What's it, 8 tracks or something. But anyway, Slim Whitman, he had a little pencil-thin mustache, pull-back jet black hair, sideburns, black coat, white shirt with one of those Western ties on it, balea ties, and this promoter looked exactly like this guy, and I'll never forget him. His name was Henry Rogers, and everyone from the South and everyone from Kentucky and Missouri and Arkansas, they eventually went there and wrestled for him. Sooner or later, everyone went there.
So just going back a little bit to Lou Thesz, what's your overall opinion of him? I've heard lots of different stories, like he was a bit of a bully in the ring, ate people up, wasn't good at making wrestlers look good all the time unless he respected them. What do you think of him overall? That's
pretty much how Lou was. For some guys that probably didn't have the training I did from somebody, if he knew Vern Gagne trained you, then he wouldn't beat up on you as bad. If he knew Ole and Gene Anderson trained you, he wouldn't beat up on you. If he knew that Eddie Graham and Hiro Matsuda from Florida had trained you, and my trainer Herb Welch, these were legitimate trainers, and he respected those guys, and he respected the fact that they wouldn't have trained someone that was not going to be good. So in that respect, he was not as mean and ornery, but I knew that at any given time he could turn on me, because if you did something wrong, he would let you know you did it wrong, and he let you know right away in the ring. Lou would take liberties with people, and liberties to all the fans out there means that he would hit you when you weren't looking, or give you that elbow to the side of the head and make blood come out your ear, or cross-face you. He was real bad about cross-facing guys, hammerlocking you and then cross-facing you, and put the side of his arm right here. He would put that part of his arm right on your nose and just squeeze it until it was either going to break or you gave up. Or you learned how to get out of the hold.
So moving on to your Blonde Bombers days, how did that tag team come about, and how did the name come about?
That was myself and Larry Latham, and Larry passed away a few years ago actually doing what he loved doing, and he was in the ring when he passed away, not in some cheap hotel of a drug overdose or something of that nature. He actually was one of the few guys that's passed away doing what he loved in the ring. Larry and I were put together. I was working for Jerry Jarrett, and Jerry Jarrett had me dye my hair blonde, thinking I would be the next Tommy Rich for him, which I was never in that category with Tommy, because Tommy was so far advanced in being a babyface and a good guy than I was. I was always a heel. But I had been teaming with Jimmy Valiant as just Wayne Ferris, my name, and had a few matches, and they needed someone in Tampa, Florida for a big show on a Saturday night, and they'd called, and Jarrett sent me down to Tampa, and that's where I met Larry, and they put us together in a big tag team tournament in Tampa that night, and they didn't have a name for us. We were just Ferris and Latham. So then Larry was working in Atlanta, and Ole had sent him down. Larry goes back to Atlanta. I go back to Memphis, and Larry called me and said Ole told him they would like to have you guys as a tag team in Florida. And so Larry had blonde hair, I had blonde hair. We ordered up some outfits, and we took off to Tampa. I gave my notice to Jerry Jarrett, and when we got there, they said, what do you guys need to be called something? We said, how about the Blonde Bombers? And Jerry Briscoe and those guys said, sure, that'll be great. And that's how it came about. That's how that tag team happened.
So since you brought his name up, you want to quickly tell us Tommy Rich actually was world champion for a short
Yes.
period. He
Tommy
had a lot of potential.
Yes.
And everything kind of fell apart.
Yep.
Why do you think he never truly became a superstar?
Tommy let the nightlife get to him. He let everything after hours take over. Him and Buzz Sawyer had tremendous matches together in the old WCW or NWA out of Atlanta on a TBS cable station all over America. Just fantastic matches, but they were both, the nightlife had taken them both. And Tommy, in my opinion, was the Hulk Hogan of that era. He could have been the Hulk Hogan. He was Hulk Hogan before there was a Hulk Hogan. I mean, this guy was over. If you said Tommy Rich, everyone knew that guy's name. But he was really that good. He was a good interviewer, and he was just fantastic in the ring. And he could sell and sell and sell and make people. He could make children and girls and women and guys just scream and claw and cry for him to. You know, one time I had a match with him a long time ago on an independent show, and he was crawling, and I was beating on him, and he was going to the fans, help me. I said, shut up, they're going to kill me. But yes, he was great, but the nightlife got him.
All right, now back to your Blonde Bombers. Danny Davis was your manager. How did that come about, and what did you think of him?
Danny was going through now this is the Danny Davis from Ohio Valley, not the Danny Davis from the old WWF that was the mean referee in WWF. This was Sergeant Danny Davis. It was a trainer in Ohio Valley for WWE for several years with Jimmy Cornette. Danny was in a training school with Buddy Fuller, who is Buddy Welch, was the nephew of the guy that trained me, and Buddy had got together this group of kids and guys that wanted to be wrestlers, and he was buying up this farmland, and he would put them in a bunkhouse in a barn, and they would work on the farm and pull stumps and roots and dig up grass and pull down trees and things of that. And then at nighttime he had a ring set up and he trained them to wrestle. So he didn't charge them anything, but they had to work all day. And Danny went through that wrestling school, and he was trained as a very good amateur wrestler during that time. And we came back from Tampa because the Fullers were booking Memphis at the time, Robert Fuller and Ron Fuller, the sons of Buddy Fuller, and they were booking, and they decided to leave and go to Knoxville. They left the territory. So they left the territory empty, and we got a call from Jerry Jarrett that he needed a tag team. Could we come back to Memphis? And we did, and that's where Danny had just finished his training, and they put him with us because they didn't think he was ready to be in the ring as a pro wrestler. But as time went on, then he became a wrestler also. But he was our manager as Sergeant Danny Davis with the Blonde Bombers, and we were dressed in military outfits, and gosh, that's the Tupelo concession stand stuff happened during that time.
That's what I was going to ask you about next. You had a big feud with Lawler and
Dundee.
And that was the feud where the Tupelo concession
Yeah.
stand brawl happened. You want to just go over that feud a bit and why that incident was so important in the history of wrestling?
I spoke with Jerry Jarrett not long ago, and he was on my radio show that I was doing at the time, and he says there's two things that people ask him about even after all these years. The Tupelo concession stand and Andy Kaufman, which was a big deal with Lawler and Memphis and everything. And I wasn't there for the Andy Kaufman, but the Tupelo thing came about. Like I said, the Fullers had taken all the talent. They had taken Fuji, Tanaka, Mongolian Stomper, Gorgeous George Jr. The whole talent left Jerry Jarrett with Lawler, Dundee, Coco, and just a few local guys from Memphis. Tommy and Eddie Gilbert. Eddie Gilbert was just starting in the business. He came into to Tupelo, and that was our starting night from Tampa. And he came in and said, fellas, we got to do something. We got to do something big because everybody's gone now, and we got to do. He said, you guys have a 2 out of 3 tag match. You, Lawler, Dundee, Larry, and Wayne. You guys go out there, go 3 falls. In the 3rd fall, you guys somehow or another win the match, and all hell breaks loose. And Lawler and Dundee started fighting us because we'd beat them for the belts and beating up on us and hitting us with the belts, and everybody was bleeding. And off in the concession stand we went and started fighting, and they were taping because they would always tape in Tupelo on a Friday night and get some footage for Saturday TV. So the taping crew came down, and here we are tearing up the whole place, taped it, put it on TV that Saturday morning. 10 hours later, the people saw it, couldn't believe what they had seen. All this whatever we were doing, cans, bottles, coffee mugs, I mean, you name it, we were throwing it. And that Saturday night, we went to Jonesboro, Arkansas. That was our Saturday night town. It was a turnaway crowd, biggest crowd they'd ever had. The ticket sales for the Monday night crowd, 16,000 tickets were sold out before we even got to the building on the Monday. And it turned the whole business around for Jerry Jarrett. And someone said, you guys created hardcore. Well, I don't know if we ever created it, because there's been a lot of good hardcore matches before that and a lot of hardcore matches after that. What we had was a controlled hardcore. We were able to leave there without going to the hospital, and getting stitches or anything like that. It was a controlled hardcore situation, but it turned the whole territory around, and I was part of it. The footage is very hard to find. Someone had it and put it on YouTube not so long ago, so it can be seen. You might be able to interject some of it in, because I don't think anyone owns the footage, because Jerry Jarrett never owned it, and somehow someone taped it and kept it all these years.
Now, a lot of people don't remember that you were actually thought of as a bit of a hardcore wrestler in those days.
Or that I could wrestle at all.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And, I had a whole career before I was ever the honky-tonk man. I mean, I had like 10 or 12 years of this history you're going back to.
Do you want to show us? You got a mark on one of your arms there from one of your battles.
Oh, there's one over here, and then, of course, we got these ones up here. Yeah.
You went through a lot of...
I did have the one thing that did happen to me in the Tupelo concession stand match was I had an old rusty nail that hit me somewhere in the back of the arm or something. I was a little worried about it. I took some antibiotics, but I never went to the doctor.
And in later years, WCW actually would hold a yearly uncensored pay-per-view, and they would hold that in Tupelo, and it was known as kind of the No Rules pay-per-view. Do you think that whole pay-per-view was based on that concession stand?
Oh, I'm sure it was. That's interesting. And I had mentioned Eddie Gilbert and Tommy Gilbert. Tommy was wrestling there full-time with those guys back then, and Larry and I he was trying to break Eddie into the business as being his son, and we had a lot of tag matches with Eddie and Tommy, and Eddie was not on the card in Tupelo that night, but he was there watching because he had to be at TV the following morning. Then, for all the fans that didn't know, Eddie Gilbert teamed up then with Paul Heyman and another fella over in Philadelphia, and they created this thing called ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling.
Now, you said Lawler ran parts of the Memphis territory in those days. Did you actually work for him in those days?
Yeah, he was the booker. I mean, he was booking sometimes, and I was there. The Tupelo, all that Tupelo stuff was booked by Jerry Jarrett. Jerry Jarrett always seemed to take care of me a lot better than my cousin did as far as booking and things of that nature. It's like when I first started, started in Memphis, Jerry would have me booked, Jerry Lawler, that is, would have me booked like 2 nights. One in Louisville was a 500-mile drive. The next night, he went out and had me booked again till Saturday night in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Well, I couldn't ride with anyone because they would go from Memphis, leave on a Tuesday morning, drive to Louisville, and 4 of them guys in the car, and then the next night they would be in Evansville, Indiana, and then on a Thursday night they might be in a spot show somewhere in Hopkinsville, Kentucky on the way back, and then Friday night they'd be in Tupelo, and then Saturday night back in Jonesboro. So he would book me like so far away from each, and I couldn't ride with these guys. So I said to him once, I said, gosh, Jerry, I need a few more bookings. He said, well, if you buy more outfits, because I would go out, fans don't understand this, and we only had like 6 or 8 people on the card. The big shows had 8 people. The small towns had 6 So I'd go out and wrestle as Wayne Ferris, as myself in the first match, do a 20 minutes, and either win or lose to some guy that we were coming back in a tag match. I'd go get changed, dressed in a complete bodysuit, and be the Masked Marvel or the intern or the medic or whatever the name might have been, the Red Shadow. If I had a red outfit, I had a red mask, I was a Red Shadow. Bring your so-and-so, bring your medic mask and white suit for Tupelo or what. So I would go then and work the third match and as a bad guy, lose to one of the good guys, go back, change back into Wayne Ferris, and work the 2 out of 3, and we'd go 3 falls, 60-minute time limit in the last match.
And you were only getting paid the same?
I only got paid for one time, yeah. It was 20, 25. If it was a decent house, we'd get $30.
So would you say in those days you and Lawler were still on fairly good terms. There was obviously a little possible jealousy on his part that another member of the
Yeah.
family was in the territory. But
Yeah. That I read later. I read an interview from Jerry Jarrett that he did several years ago, and he mentioned that Jerry Lawler never really liked young guys breaking into the business. Well, at one time he was a young guy. He's only 3 years older than me, or 3 or 4 years older. So, I mean, he wasn't that old of a guy to say young guys shouldn't be around the business. But yet, he broke his own sons into the business. One was a wrestler, Brian Christopher. The other one was a referee. Kevin Christian was his name. Both great kids and very good talents. Jerry's a great talent. Did he not want to see me succeed? I think because he wasn't instrumental in my, with Herb Welch training me, because he was never a fan of the Welches at all. He thought Memphis belonged to him and a couple of the other towns that the Welches owned. And he eventually ended up getting those towns, which, I mean, gosh. And then after the Tupelo concession stand thing, I think he had a little bit more of a professional, what would you call it, ethics or courtesy toward me. He showed a little bit more professionalism.
And were you around during the whole big Andy Kaufman angle?
No, I think I was in Puerto Rico at that time. I was either in Puerto Rico or I was in Knoxville working for Jack Mulligan.
What did you think of it being originally from that territory to have a big superstar at the time like Andy Kaufman jumping into the wrestling business?
Well, Lawler always had these super characters. He'd had a guy dress up like Darth Vader. He had Frankenstein. He had the Mummy. He had the Freddy Krueger one. Lawler was a comic book. He loved comic books and comic book heroes, and he loved comedians. And even now, I think he still carries his joke book in his pocket and studies his one-liners so that when he goes on TV, he can say those quick one-liners. But when the Andy Kaufman thing, now I'd known Andy Kaufman was going around trying to wrestle women because I'd seen some late night television shows where Andy Kaufman had been on there and had challenged women and had gotten in the ring with some of them a couple of times. But he could never get the New York office, and then he went to Atlanta, and Jim Barnett and of course Ole Anderson, Ole, one of these hardcore guys that believed wrestling is real. I mean, wrestling is wrestling, and we have to be men. We don't wrestle women. So he was turned down there, and he pitched it. Then one of the magazine writers called Lawler and said, "Look, this guy's he's a big time." And Lawler said, "Yeah, heck yeah." So against Jerry Jarrett's wishes, Lawler went ahead and booked it anyway. Jerry Jarrett didn't really want to do it either, because Jerry was from that old school, and he didn't want the old NWA or the AWA, who he might have been partners with, to go, "Hey, we're going to kick you guys out of the organization. We don't wrestle women." So, but anyway, they did it, and heck, it was a turning point in history.
Now, you just mentioned Ole Anderson. What's your opinion of him? He's a very controversial figure.
Ole, even now that he can hardly get around and barely knows anyone from whatever he's Alzheimer's or whatever he has now. The last time I saw him, he was sitting. He didn't recognize half the people that came up and said hello. But I know this is probably a family show, but I heard him say, "Even though I can't get around, I don't know too much, I know I'm still an asshole." Well, at least he admitted it. So, but he never liked me for some reason. Now, he loved Kevin Sullivan. And Kevin and I, when I told you we were in Knoxville for Mulligan, Jack was taking over that territory for the Charlotte office. And we left Memphis, and because Kevin was from Knoxville, he wanted to move back and see his family, so he gave his notice. And then Jerry Jarrett really didn't have anything for me without being a tag team. So I said, "Well, gosh, Jerry, I'll just see if Mulligan will take me." So Mulligan took me to Knoxville, but during that period of time, Jack could not get the territory going. Charlotte was supposed to send him some guys to help out. They never sent him anyone. We had long trips. The money was short. Jack finally just ran out of money, and by then Kevin had called Atlanta, and he was going to go there and just commute back and forth because it wasn't a long trip from Knoxville. I said, "Do you think Ole will use me?" He said, "Well, I'll put a word in." Then they called me. Ole used me part-time, and after about 2 months, Bob Armstrong called. He was helping Ole. He says, "Ole don't really have anything for you. If you want to make Chattanooga Saturday, you can use you there, but you're going to be finished up."
Now, other than Atlanta, probably the biggest territory at the time, actually size-wise, would be the AWA.
Yeah, and for some reason I never wanted to go where it was cold, and I ended up, after saying this, I ended up in Calgary later on, and we'll talk about that. But I never really wanted to go there, but I knew the money was good, but I knew, and there again, Vern had all these shooters, which we call shooters, were like the Lou Thesz type guys. He had Billy Robinson, he had the Iron Sheik, he had all these college wrestlers. Baron von Reschke was an All-American in college, and of course Vern was an All-American. He had all these Olympic wrestlers, and I thought, well, gosh, that's not the place for me, because I had learned with the blonde hair and everything, I'm a show business guy. I'm an entertainer, and my interviews were entertaining and show business type interviews. So I never wanted to go there. After the Atlanta thing, I ended up in Nashville for a short time for this notorious promoter, Nick Goulas, who thought, $400 for working 20 times a week is good money. But he did tell me one thing: it's not what you make, son, it's what you save. So I always remember that. But Dutch Mantell was there, and Dutch and Dennis Condrey were going to Puerto Rico. Dennis Condrey pulled out at the last minute. Dutch needed a partner, signed it up for a year in Puerto Rico.
And what was that like? That's
oh boy! I thought the Tupelo concession stand fight was a fight, or having to fight the fans outside of Jonesboro, or outside of Memphis, or outside of Louisville. Listen, we had to fight our way in and out of every building in Puerto Rico, even though we had a security team around us. It didn't matter. They threw everything they could find. It was the wildest, hottest crowd I'd ever seen, and it was a place where it was like savagery. You had to be watching everything, or you might get knifed, you might get a brick thrown at you. They were really bad at the baseball stadium. They didn't serve anything, beers or anything, but they served it in whatever it was in a Coca-Cola cup or a cup. So what they would do is they would smuggle rocks in. These rocks, and these Puerto Rican kids got good arms on them. Now I know where they play baseball. They put the rock in the cup, and no matter what, as soon as you came out of the dugout, you were like, bam, 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 just rocks. So you had to run like crazy all the way out to the pitcher's mound, and then come back, because they had the ring set up at home plate. Once you got out to the pitcher's mound, they couldn't throw far enough to hit you. So, it was bad, but I spent almost 10 months there. It paid good. We worked 3 days one week, 4 days the next. The Funks would come in. Harley Race came in a couple times.
And it was
Abdullah the Butcher.
Pretty violent. You mentioned Abdullah the Butcher. It was a violent territory. If there was, let's say, 7 matches on a card, how many of those matches would have blood in them?
4, 5.
So you were expected to bleed many of the nights you wrestled.
Yeah. In fact, this one scar on my arm here, so you can barely see it because of my tan. It's kind of faded now. That's from Jose Gonzalez. We were in a small town in Puerto Rico on a Sunday afternoon, and we had the barbed wire match, and the ring was wrapped in barbed wire. It was myself, Carlos Colon, and Vader, who was Jose Gonzalez, and then Dutch was my partner. And I had the blood. They all had the blood. Dutch had a little trickle. He didn't like getting it, And anyway, Gonzalez, for some reason, thought I needed more blood than what I had. I was covered, so he took his blade and cut my arm. And
just for people that don't know, Gonzalez is the same person that actually killed Bruiser Brody later on.
He was acquitted of the stabbing of Bruiser Brody in the locker room.
Why do you think he was acquitted of that, even though most people know that he did it?
I wasn't there at the time. Tony Atlas actually saw the whole thing, and Tony didn't go back to be a witness, I don't think. I don't think anybody in the locker room came back to be a witness. And Puerto Rico it's run different. It's like, for all the Canadian fans out there, it's kind of like going over to Newfoundland. Newfoundland is not really run like the rest of Canada. The Northwest Territories is not really governed like the rest of Canada. So Puerto Rico is not governed so much like the rest of America. And if it had happened in the United States, I don't know what the outcome would have been. It might have been different.
And did you ever have any encounters with Bruiser Brody before?
No, I had been with him in Japan. my trip to Japan, I was there for 6 weeks after I left Puerto Rico, but I'd been with Brody in Knoxville because Mulligan would bring Brody in periodically to work some big shows in Knoxville and Roanoke, Virginia. And he brought in Big John Studd and Dick the Bruiser and different guys. But I'd first met him there, and he was really not. Bruiser Brody was the nicest, sweetest guy in the world to the wrestlers. Now, he did not get along well with the promoters, the authority figures. He just did not get along with them. I mean, it was always a struggle between him and the promoter. He liked Mulligan, so everything was okay.
Did you ever hear the story about how he left AWA?
No, I know that him and Dick the Bruiser had a big problem in Chicago where he had told Bruiser, don't pull my hair anymore. And Bruiser, being the bully he was, Dick went out and pulled his hair, and Brody got out and marched back to the locker room. And Bruiser came in, and Brody was waiting. And as soon as Bruiser said something about, why you get back in the ring, you punk? What are you doing, messing up the match? And Brody hit him over the head with a chair and knocked him out. So he didn't like promoters. And Dick the Bruiser was a promoter. And how he left AWA, I don't know. He probably tried to beat up on somebody or something.
And you also spent some time in Mid-Atlantic.
Yes.
What was that like working for Jim Crockett?
I was only there a short time. That was when Mulligan was partners with those guys. And Mulligan would work on some of the towns, and what we would do is split to talent. So I didn't really get checks or work for the Crockett's, so to speak, but I was on some of the cards there. I worked in some of the towns. I worked against Tony Atlas a few times and different people, but Mulligan paid for his guys that he brought, and then Crockett paid for his guys. But I met a lot of guys out of Crockett's territory while working for Mulligan.
Do you have any memories of Ric Flair in those days?
He wasn't around doing very much. Now, the couple of times he was supposed to come to Knoxville to help Mulligan out, they would always pull him. I think I don't know, maybe they were trying to sabotage Jack and make sure that the promotion didn't work, or somebody did. But Flair would never make the towns. The only time I was really around Rick was a few times in Atlanta when I was there, and then he came down to Mobile at Southeastern Wrestling and stayed for a week once, and then came back again for another week a year later when I was back there again and saw him. And we had a fine rapport as far as I knew until he put that nonsense in his book. I wouldn't have drawn a dime anywhere if it hadn't been for Hulk Hogan. Gosh, wasn't even around Hogan the first year in the business, and I didn't see him again for 12 years.
And you're actually still drawing money for promoters. I can speak for that.
And he's sitting home.
And you're probably a lot more financially secure than Ric Flair.
Yeah, I don't owe people all over the country money, and I haven't had multiple lawsuits against me for not paying money that I owe, and I don't owe any wrestlers money.
Do you think Ric Flair is kind of sabotaging the good memories people have of him by what he's doing in the last...
Killed his own legacy. It's a shame how some people, they're going to be remembered now for the last memory that people have of them, which is bad memories, as opposed to saying, hey, this guy was great, he was fantastic, fabulous world's champion, good talker, always looked good, always in good shape. Now they're going to remember only the last years of his career.
And you were also in Calgary for a good run, and what was your overall opinion of working in Calgary? It was very hard territory to work in.
Well, it was hard. It was difficult. Now, mind you, I went for Baba in Japan and 6 weeks over there with Brody and Killer Brooks and Jack Briscoe, and then the Funks would come in. Of course, Abdullah was there, and Moose Morawski, and Jumbo Saruta, and Baba. We had that bus that we had was full of all-stars, and I wrestled Jack Briscoe there again. I was nervous, and Baba didn't really like Jack Briscoe for some reason, and Baba would make Jack Briscoe go the 30-minute, 40-minute time limit with me every night. We did for about 4 weeks, and Jack Briscoe was the ultimate professional. We'd go out, we'd wrestle, and we'd work high spots and do everything. And I said, Jack, this is really a shame that they're doing this to you. He says, don't worry about it. Let's just go out and have our match. And that was one of the last times I saw Jack before he passed away. I saw him in Kansas City when they brought in all the NWA champions. Vince McMahon Jr. did at WWF. Had them all in Kansas City for one of the pay-per-views. In fact, that was the day, I think, that they had found that young fella dead, Brian Pillman. That they had found him dead that particular Sunday. But getting back to Calgary.
Before we move on to Calgary, you just brought up Giant Baba. You want to just give us your opinion on him quickly while you're on?
Well, he didn't take to underneath guys. He overpaid some of the superstars. Abdullah and those guys, I heard figures like $10,000, $12,000 a week back then.
Abdullah's claiming $25,000 a week.
Well, I don't believe that, but anyway, Abdullah was instrumental in getting me into to Japan because the Funks were playing ping pong with me. I asked Terry, "Oh, I don't do it. Go ask Dory." You go to Dory, Dory go, "I don't have anything. You go ask Terry." So I played ping pong. So finally I said, "Abby, can you get me in there? I've got time off. I don't start in Memphis for about 6 or 8 weeks." Okay. I said, "What kind of money can I make?" He said, $1,200 a week. Okay. Contract comes. It's got $1,000 a week on it. I said, "Abby, the contract came. It's got $1,000." He says, "Don't worry about that. I don't mind they put $1,000 a week. I'm making 10, 12, whatever he gave me. I think he told me 10. I'm making 10,000. Don't worry about the 1,000. It's for the taxes." So anyway, I go in after 6 weeks, and Baba, of course, he acts like he don't speak English. He speaks very good English. And he counts out my money, and he gives me $6,000. And he loads me up with all this stuff to take back to Memphis to carry to Onita and Fuchi. They were working as a tag team, all this Japanese stuff, and I got 2 suitcases full of junk he wants me to carry back for them to make their run in Memphis better. And I go back to Abby. I said, "Abby, he only gave me my $6,000 for the 6 weeks." He says, "What do you want me to do about it, champ? What do you want me to do? What was in your contract?" I said, $1,000. He said, "Well, you got your money." Oh, okay. And that was the last real conversation I ever had with that guy. I mean, just because of that.
That's Abdullah the Butcher.
Yeah, but every night he would come to me and say, hey, champ, call everybody champ. "Hey, champ, can I borrow some tape, champ?" And he'd take my tape and he'd roll it and 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 hand me back an empty roll.
He never brought his own tape.
Yeah.
He would either send people to get.
So, I mean, that's my feelings about it. I mean, I don't have any ill will toward Abdullah by any means, but, I mean, after that, he got me in Japan, but going there and then suffering through the way that they wrestled over there, all the suplexes and all the bumps you had to take, no wonder these guys that worked over there for most of their career can hardly walk.
So now we're going back to Calgary. What was that territory like? What was the travel like?
Oh, the travel was, it was brutal. It was easy in the summertime because Stu would close in the summer and all the guys would go over to Prince Edward Island or go over to Nova Scotia and work over there and work at the Maritimes. I never went, and so I stayed there in the summers, and we only worked 3-4 shows. We kept doing the TV in the summer, and we'd work Lethbridge on a Thursday night, Calgary on Friday, Edmonton on Saturday, then we had the whole week off. So that part was okay. But during the winters, when the winter time came and you're in the van and you got all the Hearts and you got 2 vans going, they got ball tires on them, it's black ice, they're pulling the ring, they're going 100 miles an hour. We'd have to wait. We would wait and wait and wait for Brett to get there because he was always late. And we're sitting there in the cold, and the heater barely worked, and we're waiting and waiting. And Brett's an hour late, or one of his other brothers will be an hour later. The van wouldn't even be there to pick us up, and we had to go 500 miles up in the Indian territories. And sometimes the match is supposed to start at 7:30. They wouldn't even set the ring up to like 9 or 10 at night, and then we had to turn around and drive back. It was brutal. But by the same token, I knew that someday I would get a break and go somewhere. And my break actually came out of Calgary to go to the old WWF.
While you were in Calgary, did you ever get stretched by Stu down in the dungeon?
No, I never went down there. He did stretch me on his front porch. The first day I got there, I came up from Pensacola, Florida. I had a pair of blue jeans. I had cowboy boots on. I had one sweatshirt because I lived on the beach. I mean, I didn't have winter clothes. I had my high school leather football jacket, and that was it. And we're out on the porch, and it's 30 below zero, and the wind's blowing. He didn't ask me to come in the house. He stood out on the porch, and we talked. And then he and he started touching me, and you're in pretty good shape there, because I'd been lifting weights, and I was 240 pounds, 20-inch arms, 20-inch neck, and I felt like I was in good shape. And he compared me to superstar Billy Graham. He said because my name was Wayne, and I had that Wayne Coleman. He had this big deltoids like pineapples up here on his shoulders. And what I did, and all the time he's talking to me, he's rotating my body, and then pretty soon he's got me like this. He's going, and I put it on the big superstar Billy Graham, and he almost passed out. And he said, you'll have to come over after you let me go. I was like, oh, man, this guy just cracked my neck, my shoulder. He said, you'll have to come over and we'll go downstairs and get a few workouts in if you want to. I said, yeah, maybe so. That'd be a good idea. I never went down there at all. I never even went back to the house at all.
So you never sampled any of his cooking?
No, I never did. I was never inside the house. I did go there to pick up Wayne Hart or to pick up Smith or one of the guys one time. And while I was waiting, I did get out of the car and I looked down in the dungeon. I looked down in there, and there was a big laundry room, I remember, and it was like clothes were piled up, like piles of laundry, and because that was the laundry room, and then right beside it was Stu had a little set of weights, a little weight room, and just a little mat on the floor, and I just remember Brett on the van sometimes. Brett had this cassette tape. He probably still has it, and Stu had this kid down there, and Brett's playing a tape for everyone to listen to, and the kid's going, ah, 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 and Stu's, hey, come on, fight back, be a man, ah, ah, ah. It was like a real torture chamber.
And the Hart family, would you say they got along well? They loved Stu and they loved their mother. They all loved each other. If you, as an outsider like me or somebody, would try to interfere into their business, then they would all stick together for sure. But I've seen them argue, and I've seen them get into fights with each other in the backstage, and sometimes right in front of the fans in Calgary. I saw Smith and Stu go at it, and I saw Bruce and Brett go at it, and was that the time that Smith kicked
Smith tried to kick Stu down below, and with I call it a Puerto Rican uppercut, but he tried it with his foot. Stu blocked him, and Stu went to kick Smith, and Smith turned and ran away. And I still have a good rapport with all that family. After all these years, I have a respect for them, what they went through, and they have a respect for me because I not only went there and got over and sold out a lot of places, sold out a lot of buildings along with them, but every time I would leave, I'd turn around and come back 3-6 months later, and I was back there like 3 different times. They must have thought I had to be crazy because some people only would stay 2 weeks, they'd leave.
Because there was also, they like to rib a lot.
They pulled a lot of ribs on people, and I was fortunate enough to not be part of that ribbing that they did. I'd seen them put cigarettes on top of John Foley's head while John Foley was sleeping, and put shave cream on a guy's head or hand and tickle his ear, and he'd slap at his ear, and the shave cream would go everywhere. It was little schoolyard stuff. They might shave someone's eyebrow off. I mean, what are you going to do for 8 hours in a van? You can only have so many beers, and pretty soon you got to start ribbing guys.
And you actually started in that territory calling yourself Honky Tonk Wayne.
Well, I sent my bio and everything up to Bruce, because Bruce was doing all the writing of the magazines and putting out the programs. And I was Honky Tonk Man down in Pensacola. This is where I started this black hair and a jumpsuit about, 4 or 5 months ahead of that.
Do you want to go into that before you tell us about Bruce, maybe?
Well, I don't want to forget Bruce, because when I got to Calgary, and the first thing they introduced me, or I opened the program, it said Honky Tonk Wayne. What? I didn't send you that up here. I sent you Honky Tonk Man. I just thought it might be better if we call you partly by your real name and partly by the gimmick name. Oh, well, thanks a lot, because I didn't want it to be that way. And so, hi there, come on in. Is that Vince McMahon?
Oh, sorry.
Hi, darling. How you doing?
Fine.
Never. Listen, this is live, and you never know what's going to happen. But anyway, I had been down in Southeastern Wrestling, and Robert Fuller was the one who gave me the guitar because I had the black hair and the sideburns. After some of the wrestling fans gave me a jumpsuit, and so he said, because I was punk rock Wayne Ferris down there with all different color hair, and I worked a program with Austin Idol, another blonde-haired guy, and we decided to do something different, not have a hair cutting match, but a hair dye match. So we'd spray. He would win a match every night, spray paint my hair all different colors. Finally, the last time it was black, and so that's okay, honey. That's fine. That's, if you're on a movie set, you charge $10,000 for that. Once again, it's like I said, this is like live television, and we can only edit so much, but.
Okay. So
she never even thought about we're sitting here with a camera going, but anyway, that's what can you expect out of hotel chambermaids? Yeah, the Bruce Hart thing was Honky Tonk Wayne. I didn't want to be that, so I get down when I was in Southeastern Wrestling down in Mobile and Pensacola. Some wrestling fans, we did a hair dye match instead of having a haircut match. It was myself and Austin Idol for the Mr. Alabama Heavyweight Championship. And he had blonde hair, I had blonde hair, and I was tired of the blonde hair. My hair was long, really long back then, and I wanted to cut it, and I wanted to do a black hair thing, and with a redneck gimmick with the cigarettes rolled underneath my sleeves, or wear one of those wife beater T-shirt type things, and be that kind of slimy character. And these wrestling fans came to me and said, "You got the sideburns, you got the black hair. Have you ever thought about Elvis?" I said, "No, I never wanted to do that." They took my measurements. I said, "What's this for?" They said, "We're going to buy you something for your birthday." And my birthday was coming up. And they show up with a jumpsuit, this gold lame jumpsuit. So I put it on. I wore it out. Robert Fuller sees it. And he says, "Man, we need to get a guitar. You take that guitar. You start hitting people over the head, across the back. And we can do something with that." And it worked out. I mean, he gave me the guitar. And I changed the name from punk rock, from doing all the spray paint colors, to Honky Tonk Man.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I need to find some clips.
I think we got that story. Oh, just wait a second. Bruce likes to say that he came up with the whole hockey.
No, absolutely not. I think we went over that earlier with, the wrestling fans in Mobile and Pensacola down in Southeast gave me the jumpsuit. I had the black hair. Robert Fuller gave me the guitar. I gave myself the name off a record, Johnny Horton's "I'm a Honky Tonk Man." And that's how that started. Then Bruce, the only thing Bruce did was change the name to Honky Tonk Wayne, which I hated and I didn't want. And so I even had a jacket at home that I wore as a ring jacket that had Honky Tonk Man on it. On the back, it had Honky Tonk Man. On the front, it was embroidered. Honky Tonk Man, like a tour jacket that the country and western people had back then. And I had to cover up the name on the front. I couldn't wear it on their TV because it said Honky Tonk Man on the back, but he was calling me Honky Tonk Wayne. My wife remembers me as that because that's how she met me, as that character. And, Schultz would always say, "Oh, just let it go. Don't worry about it." Dr. D. David Schultz. I said, "Well, that's not how I've created this character. It's not that way." But Bruce had nothing to do with the creation of this character. He had nothing to do with the guitar. I brought it with me. I used it up there. Stu was the one who said, "Sure, I like it. Let's do it." And, I really answered to Stu the whole time I was there and no one else.
Now, I recently read Bruce Hart's book, and it seems like there's a lot of tension between Bruce and Brett in the book over the years.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Including back when you wrestled for them.
Oh, yes.
Did you ever notice any tension between Bruce and Brett?
I saw them have their words. I saw them periodically. They might push each other. I mean, they never actually punched each other or anything that I know of. They always had Sunday dinner. I can imagine being a fly on the wall at that big Sunday dinner with all the whole family there every Sunday to listen to what was going on. But Bruce was the booker, but yet he didn't give finishes so much to me and to David Schultz or to Brett. Brett did his own thing, and Brett was always, unless someone else like a David Schultz or Dan Crawford that was a big star there, they were always the guys that Stu was pushing. The outsiders were always the North American Heavyweight Champion, unless Brett had the belt at some time or another. and then the world's champion was coming in, whether it be Harley Race or whether it be Nick Bockwinkel, then Brett would always wrestle the world's champion. So Bruce never liked that because Bruce was booking and he thought he should be the one that was wrestling the world's champion, or he thought he should be one calling the finishes, but by the same token, he didn't call the finishes for certain guys. And that made his job difficult. I understand that when you're having to split your power. And I just know that Brett always wanted to wrestle the world's champion. He got to wrestle the world's champion except the one time that I know of. And it was just before Brett and Dynamite and Davey and Jim Neihart went to WWF. Nick Bockwinkel came to town, and Dr. D. David Schultz made a power play on Stu and said, I'm the North American heavy. I don't care who the North American heavyweight. I think Brett was at the time maybe, because Schultz was in a tag team match with me. I don't care who the North American champion is. It might have been Leo Burke. At that time, he said, I want to wrestle Nick Bockwinkel, and that's just how it is. I've been up here for all these years, and I've done this for you, and I've done this, I've done that, and I've had to listen to this and listen to that, and all this stuff you guys do around here. Either I wrestle Nick Bockwinkel or I'm walking. So Nick came to town, and David wrestled Nick Bockwinkel, but I later found out that it might have been a way for David to wrestle Nick Bockwinkel because David wanted to go to AWA because Hogan was down there and they were doing great business, payoffs were good. It wasn't that far of a trip out of Calgary to get down to Minneapolis, and he eventually, a couple of months later, he ended up at the AWA.
Did you ever hear that David Schultz has claimed that he actually came up with the idea for the first WrestleMania?
I was there, and he did an interview not so long ago, and someone asked him, is it true you came up with the idea of WrestleMania? He says, I don't recall ever coming up with that, but I was in the car when he would talk about it. We would drive 300, 400, 800 miles, and he had this idea about WrestleMania, and he had this idea about having these stars come in.
Because I heard he would say over and over Dr. D and Mr. T, and he wanted it to be Dr. D and Mr. T.
And then something happened where they used Paul Orndorff and Piper, Mr. T and Hogan, and he got cut out of the loop. And I don't know the inside story on why he was cut out of the loop on that first WrestleMania.
I believe it had something to do with the John Stossel incident.
I think it probably did. It could have. You'd have to, that would be an interesting story to sit down with Dr. D. David Schultz and get his insight if he would, open up and tell the truth. And, you talk about guys that tell the truth. I'm one of the few guys that started this whole shoot business and going out and actually telling the truth, and they get the wrestlers to come to me and say, man, you're going to get in a lot of trouble, man. There's a lot of guys don't want to talk to you anymore. You're getting heat from people by saying these things. Well, come to find out, 8-10 years later down the road, everyone has done them. Everyone. I guess the only one that hasn't sat down and done one has been Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
I mean, to sit down and just do a one-on-one, he's probably been the only one. Everyone else has sat down and done these things. And
your opinions may have been controversial at times,
right,
but you certainly never made up anything false.
Very controversial, very opinionated, which doesn't sit well with it doesn't sit well at all with wrestling insiders, the wrestling community, and the wrestlers themselves. But there comes a time when, if you ask me a direct question, I'm going to give you the best direct answer I can without stretching the truth. Now, there's people who say, that's not ever happened. He's lying. So what? We had arena rats. All of us did. We had them in every town all over. Oh, he said we had arena rats, which means girls. We had girls when we were out of town. I don't want my wife to hear that. Well, hey, 28 years ago, when I had arena rats in Memphis, I wasn't married to my wife that I've been married to for the last 27 years. So why should she care what I did before I met her? So why should these guys care that when you say that, oh man, you shouldn't say this is going to get me a divorce? Well, you've had 4 wives since then.
And what were the arena rats like in your early days before you went to WWE and those territories? I've always heard there was a lot of arena rats. Is that just a...
No, there were a lot. There were Tampa had tons. Atlanta, I mean, unless you were in like a real small town, like even Tupelo, Mississippi had a dozen. Jonesboro, Arkansas, there was a dozen. You might be in some obscure town like Bruton, Alabama, or I think it was called, just on the border of Florida and Mobile, and you went there once every 6 months. There might only be one or two that would show up, and they might follow you from Mobile or something. These girls would drive. They would drive 300 miles. Sometimes they would drive us, the wrestlers. They would buy us clothes. They would buy us food. They would do. I mean, they did all these things for us. And to sit there and say, you know, how can you say that you came home from a wrestling match one night and you told your real girlfriend, where'd you get those nice patent leather wrestling boots that cost about $150? Oh, I had a friend of mine give them to me. Oh, I ordered them and they just came to the arena. Yeah, right. Some girl brought them. She bought them for you. You know, I mean, we didn't pay for anything back then.
So you did Stampede Wrestling. You were wrestling for the wrestling company in BC, I think Al Tomko.
I went over for Al Tomko.
And you really were actually making a name for yourself in Canada with the Honky Tonk Man gimmick. Then you moved on to WWE. How did you first start talks with WWE? How did that whole deal come about?
Let me go back just for a second and say that I had a dispute with Stu, myself and David Schultz. So we called up Al Tomko. Al Tomko was promoting his All-Star Wrestling out of Vancouver, and they were the same as Turner Broadcasting, TBS in Atlanta. The station in Vancouver was the first satellite TV station in Canada that they beamed the signal all across Canada. And so for us to be on that BC TV was a major, major deal, especially if you wanted to be known across Canada, because Stu's TV only went in Alberta and Saskatchewan. It didn't go into BC or anything like that.
And Alberta and Saskatchewan are fairly scarcely populated provinces for anyone who doesn't know Canada very well.
So Stu and, of course, Bruce and a couple of the brothers, they disliked Al Tomko to no end, and why, I do not know. Because Al never really came to Calgary. He never tried to steal talent from them. I mean, Jerry Morrow would go over there and work for Al Tomko. He would come back, and Jerry would work for Stu. And a lot of guys would go back and forth sometimes. But when David and I decided that we were a hot program in Calgary, we'll take this program and go over for Al Tomko. He offered us twice as much money, so we said, sure, we'll go. So we went over and did that for Al. And going over for Al, I was able to then establish Honky Tonk Man. Not Honky Tonk Wayne anymore. Al, I want to be called Honky Tonk Man. Well, then Schultz leaves, goes back to Stu, goes to Minneapolis. I stay with Al. And for the next 6 or 8 months or a year, I was all across Canada on Canadian TV. I went back for Stu. We buried the hatchet. Everything was good. And then WWE came through. I met Hogan and those guys again that I haven't seen in 10, 12 years, like I said earlier.
Did you want to go how you knew Hogan from before? Did you always know?
He broke in the business. I had been in the business for about 2 years, and he broke in the business out of Tampa, came up to the Pensacola, Mobile area where I was working for Southeastern, and the booker there was the guy named Louis Thesz, a French-Canadian, who had traveled all over America, and he booked a lot for the Fullers. And so they had him in as a booker, and he told Ron Fuller, he said, I have this guy out of Tampa. They call him the Huck. They call him the Huck with his French accent. And so he showed a picture to Ron Fuller, and Ron Fuller said, well, can this kid work? He says, you know, he's really green, but I think he's going to be a big star. And when he came into Pensacola, that's when I met him, and he had his traveling partner, Eddie Leslie, and they were called the Boulder Brothers. Terry the Huck Boulder and Eddie the Huck Boulder. But it was Eddie Leslie and Terry Bollea who were Hulk Hogan and Brutus Beefcake later on. So we met. They stayed at our apartment, myself and David Schultz. When their car was in their truck, their van was in the shop. They used my car. We shared our food. They were just, I mean, they weren't making any money. It was their first territory, and they were scared to death. I mean, they were afraid of everything. They were so afraid because they didn't understand the business. And here they are, 500, 800 miles from Tampa, don't know anybody, and they see this cast of characters, me with long blonde hair, David Schultz with blonde hair, our heads all cut up with scars and scratches. But that's how we met. And then he came to Memphis, we went to Memphis, and then Hogan and Eddie came to Memphis as the Boulder Brothers again. And they had a little short program there, and Jerry Jarrett got them a car. got him his first green Lincoln Continental. I remember it. Jerry Jarrett went out and went down on the note for the car and everything. Then they moved on to Atlanta, and I didn't see them after they left Memphis until Calgary, which was about 12 years later.
When you first saw Hogan,
I knew right away he was money. Yeah, I knew what you were going to ask me. As soon as I saw this guy, I knew he was made of money. I mean, he had that long blonde hair. He had that Fu Manchu. He had this body. He was tanned. He did all the superstar Billy Graham stuff in his interviews, and he was a great talker. And he actually learned how to work as he went along. Beefcake never had a lesson. I mean, we worked out with Beefcake just in the apartment and in the buildings. We would go early in Panama City and Pensacola and places. And he'd get in the ring and work out. Sometimes he borrowed my boots and everything because he didn't have boots to wear. But they were two nice guys, really nice guys, and I knew they both were going to make money. And then when I met up with him in Calgary, he said, "Man, why don't you come join us? How come you never come to Minnesota?" And all this stuff. And then he said,
Hogan was working for WWE.
Yes, they had a big show at the Calgary Stampede, and Stu was able to get me on the card because Vince didn't want any outsiders on the card for those big shows because he had Hogan, he had John Studd. I don't think Andre the Giant was on that show that night, but all the other stars were. Adrian Adonis, Piper, the list went on and on. It was sold out. It was 22,000 people at the Saddle Dome. And that was my in with Hogan. He took me in the bathroom, and he said, "How come you ain't joined up with us yet?" I said, "Well, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't think I was good enough." And he says, "Man, you're as good as anybody else." He said, "I'll have Vince call you tomorrow." Next morning, 8 o'clock, phone rang, and that was it. I told him, I said, "I need to tell Stu and give a notice." He said, "That's the right thing to do." He called Stu himself. He said, "I want to start using this guy."
So what were your first impressions of Vince McMahon, talking to him on the phone? Did you realize WWE had such great potential? Because at that time there was still a lot of leagues out there, and WWE was still kind of up in the air.
I knew they had this potential because I'd seen the crowd they drew in Calgary. Now, on our best night, we could have never gone to the big building and drawn 22,000. Our best night ever probably would have been 5,000 across the street at the little hockey arena. At the pavilion, we were at the pavilion, only held about 1,500. The corral held about 4,000 or 5,000. So that's on our best thing that we could have done would have been fill that building. And here this group comes in that's not on television in Canada, in Calgary anyway, and with this big super show, but they had been on national television, NBC, Saturday night's main event, and we see all these huge crowds, and I wanted to be part of that. Plus, I'd talk to Dynamite and Davey and Brett and Jim. They'd come back periodically on their night off. They might have a week off, and they'd work for Stu on a Friday night if they were off. And they would tell us about the paydays, If we get $3,000 for this show and then the NBC gives us another $3,000, we make $6,000, $7,000 a night. The lowest guy on the card's making $4,000 a week. And I was going, man, I want to be part of that. I want some of that action. But I could tell right away. I knew that they had everything, the wheels in motion. And you mentioned it in your question. There were still these factions of territories out there. But Stu was smart. He jumped at the chance to get involved with WWE, even though according to Bruce and Brett and those books that have been written, Stu ended up getting the shaft, which a lot of guys did. It's only, Vince is a tough businessman. But Kansas City was still running. They had set the ring truck on fire in Kansas City. Memphis was still running. We came to Memphis, and there was all of a sudden there was a 5 o'clock news was there. There was, ladies and gentlemen, there's been a grease fire at the Coliseum. We don't know if the WWF wrestling matches are going to be on tonight or not. Well, that killed our crowd. And there was still, Texas had a little operation going. Portland still had a little operation going. Vern Gagne was on ESPN and trying to go nationwide himself. Atlanta was still going, TBS. So Vince had a lot of obstacles to fight, but he overcame them. Did he do it by being ruthless and mean and hateful? Well, people don't really succeed. Hi there, how you doing, buddy?
What's going on?
You're going to have to put a sign on that door.
Yeah, you got an extra paper?
You're going to have to put a sign on it.
I mean, I've told them about that. Do you have a...
No one did anything, just take it on a dagger.
Do not enter.
That didn't happen once yesterday, I promise you.
Oh, it always happens to me.
Because they know the honky tonk man's in there. They want to just get.
I guess.
You were talking about you knew you had a feeling it was going to be big, and you talked to Vince McMahon. What was that first conversation like with Vince?
I was a nervous wreck. I mean, here's this. Like I said, they just had this big crowd of 22,000 people, and I happen to be just a very small part of it. And now I'm getting the call to say, I understand you'd like to come in and be part of what we're doing, and I think we'd have a good spot for you. Can you come down on Wednesday and bring a tape of what you've been doing so I can see it? And he said, you got a good recommendation from the Hulkster, Hulk Hogan. You know, he's doing great things down here, and he says, you can help us. I said, I'd love to, and let me clear it with Stu. He said, I've already called Stu. It's all clear. Just bring a tape down and show me what you can do. So I went down on a Wednesday, went to this little small office in Connecticut, and he looked at the tape, and he said he had Howard Finkel and Arnold Skolin in the room with him, and we looked at the tape. And I showed a real short clip of me working with Dan Crawford, having a really good match and hitting Dan Crawford about 5 times with a guitar, whap, whap, across the back. And then I had an interview where it was like a 2 minute, 48-second interview that I carried that interview and talked about all these things: diamond rings, limousines, a rich girl's lover, poor girl's dream, you know, Friday night at the Stampede Park, a blood's going to flow like wine. And he said, what do you guys think? They said, he's a heck of a talent. Where you been for 10 years? I said, well, just bumping around doing other stuff. And he said, I'd like for you to be part of it. And I said, sure, I'd love it.
Were you surprised that they wanted you to debut as a babyface?
That surprised me. In fact, he mentioned that during the meeting. After he looked at the tape, he told me, he says, I can envision little kids out there with scarves and little jumpsuits and little Elvis look-alike wigs and sideburns. And he had this vision of merchandise, not me being a wrestler. And he said, of course, you'd have to be a good guy and do that. I said, well, I told him, I said, Vince, I didn't create this character that way. I haven't been a babyface in 14 years. I don't know if I can even do it. And he said, oh, yeah, you can do it. You can do it. It's going to be wonderful. And we'll put out these photos and mugs, and we'll have, I mean, he was thinking merchandise. He wasn't thinking about wrestling. So I went in there as a good guy, as a babyface, and it was a total flop, because they first premiered me and promoted me just out of Toronto at that little studio where they were taping TV in Brampton, Ontario. Well, as we had mentioned earlier, I had been on BC TV all across Canada for the last 2 years as this mean, dreadful, beat 'em over the head, arrogant, honky-tonk man. The Canadian people, as soon as they saw me, they started booing and throwing stuff because they had seen me for 2 years. I go out there and try to be a nice guy, come back. Now, we got 3 hours of TV. I've got to go out 3 hours that night. So every time I came out, it got worse. They hated me more. The boys in the back, the other wrestlers, going, how come these people hate you so much? I said, well, I've been on TV for 2 years up here. They know me. I said, man. So about 6 months later, they decided that this thing is not going to work. These people hated me.
Did you have any feuds as a babyface?
No, not really. It was all underneath stuff. It was all just breaking in and getting. They did a wonderful job back then of just promoting you on TV, letting you come out, do a promo to the live audience, taping it, showing it on TV. And then they did these little talking heads up in the corner of the TV screen where you had a little short interview for 30, 45 seconds. And if you did have a match, it was with one of they called them jobbers back then, TV job guys, which were local guys who had worked territories. So they would go out for 3 minutes and make you look good. And I did that for a month, 6 weeks before they finally had me booked. I thought, gosh, are you ever going to book me on a house show? And finally, after about 6 weeks, I had my first booking, and I was like Hartford, Connecticut or somewhere, and I was booked for 3-4 days a week, and I had matches with like Lanny Poffo, I had matches with S.D. Jones, just guys that were in the territory that were working undercard, and they were kind of the guys that would go in the ring with you and see if you were good enough and if you could work. And I always had a good rapport with everyone on the undercard. And that way, the next booking sheet, I had 65 days. And for those 65 days, I was under the card.
So was there ever an actual heel turn, or did you just kind of...
There was never a heel turn other than Jesse Ventura came up with the idea for doing the vote of confidence. And they put up a bogus 1-800 vote honky or something, and and then he came back about 2 weeks later and says, well, the vote, now he was a bad guy commentator. Vince was a good guy, but they let Jesse, well, the votes are in, honky tonk man. Oh, I knew it. They love me. They love the honky tonk man. They want to see me out here. I want to kiss some babies. I want to have so much fun. He said, no, you don't get it. Don't you understand? They voted like 800 to 20 against you. They don't like you at all, greaseball. And that was the turn right there. That was it.
So your first real feud, I guess, would have been with Jake Roberts.
Yes, my first big feud came with Jake. Jake had been a bad guy, and Jake was a bad guy. Now I'm the bad guy, and I go out and do Jake the Snake Pit. And Jake's interviewing me, calling me all these greaseball, dressed up like Evans. Who do you think you are? Well, when Jake first went out to do his Jake the Snake Pit, of course, the people booed him because he had been in matches with Savage and been in matches with Hogan, and he was the bad guy.
Was that the first Snake Pit ever? Or?
No, he had had a few of those before, where he was getting over as a bad guy, but they thought that Jake could serve them better as a good guy, and they wanted to promo me into upper level on the card. So he said, go out, and when Jake starts talking, blah, 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 and he turns his back to reach to pick the snake up, and he turns around, you whack him. And when I hit Jake with a guitar, that place cheered Jake. I mean, they turned on me like rabid animals. And from then on, Jake was a good guy. So we didn't have to do more than a 2-minute interview segment for me to turn Jake.
So Jake actually claims that whole guitar hit, that it was a very heavy guitar, and that actually screwed him up so much that he got hooked on pain fetish instead of drug. Did you ever hear of Jake doing drugs before that? Because, of course, I've read quite a few wrestling books. Road Warrior Animal even says he was quite into drugs back when they were roommates. So this would have been numerous years later. Do you think you really injured Jake? And did that injury have anything to do with this, 30-plus year now?
That he claims that I hurt him and he had to have neck surgery. Well, I always say this. The stuff that I knocked out of Jake's ears, was the powder that came out of the guitar was not the kind that Jake was using. Let's put it that way. But here's the point, and the fact of the matter is this. Jake wrestled 2 more years before he had neck surgery. He wrestled 2 years after I hit him with a guitar, before he even complained about neck surgery. Jake was Jake was in and out of rehab several times while we were having our program together after the WrestleMania 3. And Jake had his demons, and he admits that. The thing that bothered me the most was Mick Foley wrote in his book that I permanently injured Jake, caused Jake Roberts to have neck surgery, which probably shortened Jake's career. So I took offense to that. And I called Foley like a man should. I called him up and I said, Mick, why did you write this in your book and say these things? Promoters are going to read this and think I hurt people. And I said, I've never hurt anybody in my life in this business, ever. He said, well, that's what Jake told me. I said, do you mean that's the only person you asked was Jake? I said, why didn't you ask me? I said, you're a journalist now. You're writing books. Yes. I said, a good journalist will go to all his sources. He will ask everyone before he forms an opinion. I said, you never asked me. If you would have asked me, I'd have told you. The guitar was so gimmicked that I had to hide it because some of the boys would come along. They'd like to pick it up and play with it. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. So I had to go hide this thing. We had cut it, and that was a big, heavy guitar. But we had cut it with a carpet knife and cut X's and cut lines in it. And we took a black permanent marker and blacked it in all the white parts so you couldn't see the white part of the wood. It was so gimmicked that I pushed on it with my thumb and I thought it was going to break. And I told Jimmy Hart, I said, we got to hide this because it's going to get broken. That's the only one we had.
Now, what was Mick Foley's response to the apology?
He told me he was sorry. He says, you know, you're right. I should have asked somebody other than Jake. I said, given Jake's reputation, and Jake's had openly admitted all his demons, I said, why would you want to believe Jake? He says, well, you know, I've been around Jake a few times and everything. I trusted his opinion. I said, well, you know. But anyway, it was. I mean, we didn't have harsh words or anything by any means.
He talks actually in the same book that Jake, when he was traveling with Jake didn't overcome his demons and
So-
was doing all sorts of stuff. Back when he was doing his religious gimmick, even. So that feud, I guess the epitome of that feud was WrestleMania 3, and Alice Cooper was involved with that match. What was WrestleMania 3 like for you? Probably the biggest wrestling event of all time, and any memories of Alice Cooper from that night?
We knew that the WrestleMania 3 was going to be big. None of us ever dreamed it was going to be that big. As far as going out there, you couldn't see the people. They looked like they were so far up. They looked like tiny little ants. And if you ever get a chance to show that photo and so the people can see that aerial view from the top of the building down, I showed it to my daughter the other day. She'd never seen it. I said, this is what we had one time. This is the kind of people we drew. And she said, gosh, Dad, you can't even recognize them. They look like little ants. I said, yes, there was 90-something thousand people. We never dreamed it'd be that big. We never dreamed it would take off like it did after that. WrestleManias had been so-so. WrestleMania 1 had been not a real profit for WWE because they tried to simulcast or something, or maybe that was WrestleMania 2 where they tried to do it from two different places, and it wasn't a complete failure, but as far as business-wise, it was not good. WrestleMania 3 put Vince McMahon and WWF over the top. And to be in there with Alice Cooper, you know, I'd never met him before. He lives in Phoenix. Aretha Franklin was there and sang and everything. And we were interviewed backstage by that girl, Mary Hart, that was on that Entertainment Tonight show for so many years. It was a star-studded event, but we had been on the road. I want the fans to remember this and keep in mind. We had been on the road like 50-something days straight. We had the night off. If I remember, we might not even had the night off before WrestleMania 3. I don't even think we did. I think we wrestled somewhere that night and drove into Detroit and went to that show that day. And we didn't know how big the crowd was until the first match went out and saw the crowd. But being with Alice Cooper, it was Jake's idea to have Alice Cooper because he thought, well, Alice Cooper handles snakes, and Alice Cooper's, you know, top name in the rock, alternative rock kind of music business, and had a big following at the time and was from Detroit, so that enhanced the crowd a little bit. But we get out there, and before we went out, Jake showed Cooper the size of the snake, and this was a big snake. And Cooper was like, I don't know if I can do this. I only handle like those little bitty ones, you know. I don't mess with those big ones. Jake told him, it'll be okay, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Cooper was like really nervous. And every time I would get on Jake, I'd get Jake over near Alice Cooper, and I'd hammer on him and say, you're going to be next, Alice. What kind of name do you have, Alice, anyway? He almost got ready to climb into the ring and jump on me because I had gotten him so worked up with beating on Jake. Come on, Cooper, you're next when I finish with him. Bing, bing, bing. And then when he did get in the ring and he had this big snake, he could hardly hold it. And he had to put it on Jimmy Hart, and Jimmy was struggling and would. Jake almost had to break Jimmy's neck to hold him.
So I actually saw an interview with Billy Jack Haynes where he actually said he saw Jake doing coke before his match WrestleMania 3 and numerous other wrestlers. Was drug use open in the back in those days?
I honestly can say I never saw any of that, ever. Now, mind you, I didn't hang around with those guys that did that stuff. I didn't go to their hotel rooms at night. I don't know what they did. I heard rumors about it even before I went there, about the amount of money they were spending, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a week on all sorts of things, whether it be steroids or prescription medicines or, you know, under the table medicines. I never saw it. Did I see steroids used? Yes. Yeah. I did see that, but I never saw hard drugs used in the locker room or outside around the building. Nothing. I never. Now I could tell if someone had been doing it, they might have done it before they got to the building. They might have went out to their car. But me personally, I never experienced seeing it.
And it wasn't just a WWE problem. It was on a lot of wrestling promotion dressing rooms.
It was. I mean, I don't want to single out WWE or WWF on anything because before I even went there, I was never doing cocaine ever. Very seldom. Once here and there. When I was in, San Antonio, Texas, on maybe 2 occasions my whole life, I never even bothered with it, didn't want it. I smoked a lot of marijuana, and I took a lot of pills. I drank a lot of beer and whiskey and wine, and I took a lot of steroids. But that was normal for that era, and it was everywhere. It wasn't just in wrestling business. It was in football. It was in baseball. It was in everywhere.
Entertainment. And do you think in that WWE era there was pressure on wrestlers to take steroids?
I was asked that in front of the grand jury, and I told the prosecutors the pressure was not put on us by management. Vince McMahon never told me to take steroids, and I told them that also. And I told the grand jury in New York before the steroid trial began, and I wasn't called as a witness because I did not witness him telling me, he said, all the guys here work out and everybody goes to the gym, so you'll have to figure in, the road trips are tough. You'll have to figure in some gym time because, our guys are a little bit, back then everyone was bigger and stronger, and I was just a normal guy. I'd been doing my weights and everything, but I was nowhere near what these guys were. And that's all he'd ever mentioned to me, that I might, you need to get in some workouts because the guys like to stay in shape and they know all the gyms around and everything. But he never implied to me in any way that I needed to take any kind of enhancement drugs.
Did you ever take steroids?
Oh, yes, of course. I took them up until I was not there anymore.
Is that because you wanted to be in a top spot, and most of the wrestlers, I would say probably all of the wrestlers in the 1980s top spots, with very few exceptions, were on steroids?
Even the bottom guys, even the guys underneath were taking them. I mean, the only guys that didn't take steroids was, I think, Bobby Heenan and Howard Finkel and George Animal Steel and Jimmy Hart. I mean, I can name a few guys that I can honestly say they weren't taking them, but we did it. I mean, I was doing it before, and I didn't want to stop. I mean, I enjoyed the way that I looked on them. I enjoyed that I didn't have to work out quite as hard to get, better results, and I didn't get injured as much. I mean, it did help in injuries.
Was it easy to get steroids in those days?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was easier to get them even back when I was in Pensacola. It was easy to get them when I was in Texas. It was easy to get them in Atlanta. It was easy to get them in Memphis. It was a common thing. Doctors, it was a prescription that the doctors would prescribe. They weren't illegal.
Now, the doctor that was involved in that whole steroid scandal with WWE, which I believe they were cleared on, but the doctor wasn't.
Yeah.
He would often set up shop in the dressing room. How did that work? Can you explain?
He was a commissioned doctor, and he would be in one room, the commissioner's in the other. You'd go in, you'd sign your forms and everything. They'd said, okay, you need to go in and see the doctor because he had to give you blood pressure and check your heart and lungs, and that was pretty much it. But he had his bag of goodies, and he would ask you, if there's anything you need and how are you feeling, blah, blah, blah. And he never implied that he had steroids. He never told me, do you want some steroids? He never said that, and this is what I told the prosecutors in New York. He would just ask if there's anything you need, how you feeling. But word had gotten around that this is, when you get to Hershey, Pennsylvania, this is where you can get them, and this doctor gives them out. So, I mean, he actually went to prison over it because he was, the ironical part of it was he worked for the athletic commission. It wasn't like he was just a rogue doctor out there that was giving them out to us. He was the athletic commission doctor, and I think that's why they frowned upon him so much. And he was a nice guy. He just got caught up. I think he was, in a lot of ways, I think he was scapegoated.
Was he mailing wrestlers prescriptions?
I never mailed them to me. I never heard of any mails other than what I've read later on. I never saw that.
And most of steroids were actually legal up until around 1990.
Yeah.
So, do you have any idea what exactly was he convicted for if steroids were legal at the time?
You know, I think it was maybe by not writing the prescriptions, because he didn't have a prescription pad to write them. He was just giving them out to us, and we paid him. So he was really, I guess you could say he was selling them under the table, or if they did find out he was mailing them, then that's like an interstate commerce thing that, you know, it's a technicality, but you're not supposed to be, if you're a licensed doctor in one province, like in Canada, or a licensed doctor in one state here in the United States, you can't be shipping or sending prescription drugs to someone that doesn't, that where you can't take the prescription, and you can't take a prescription from Phoenix and have it at a pharmacy in New York City.
Right.
Because the doctor who writes it's not licensed to write them. So that, when you look at it that way, I understand what he might have done wrong.
And Hulk Hogan was actually around the time of the steroid trial under a lot of pressure.
Yes.
And publicly denied taking steroids, and he was even accused of cocaine use. He denied it, but he's later admitted to it.
Yeah.
Do you think he did the right thing at the time by denying all of the usage?
Given his position and who he was and his stature around the world, being one of the most recognizable characters around the world of 5 or 6 people that would be recognized on any part of this planet, I would, in his position, I would have done the same thing. I would have skated the question. I would have not answered it probably legitimately, but he did come back later on and come clean and say, but he had a reason. I mean, here was a guy that he was the epitome of what a child or some young person wanted to be. Say your prayers, take your vitamins, be like Hulkamania, do all these good things. I can understand it.
And Billy Graham at the time was one of the main former WWE wrestlers that were, I guess it was later proven he was telling the truth about most of the steroid and drug use going on. Was he telling most of the truth that time, other than the part, Vince McMahon, obviously he was not pushing it on anybody, but was he telling the truth that most wrestlers were on steroids and a lot of wrestlers did drugs?
Yeah, at the time. At that point in time, but it wasn't just in WWF or WWE. It was nationwide. It was all over the spectrum. I mean, it wasn't just steroids. Some guys never took steroids, but they were taking everything else.
And why do you think when wrestling is really entertainment, it's not even a real sport, they picked on wrestling so much, and we later found out that there was a massive problem in baseball. As far as I know, hockey doesn't even test for steroids, and there's other sports out there that haven't really been examined as much as wrestling. Why were they picking on wrestling?
Because we were superhuman cartoon characters, and Vince had created this WWF conglomerate and drawing all these people from everywhere and having these big events, and who knows who might have been behind going and squealing on us, or why they pointed to wrestling. It's like now they point to wrestling as having the most young people that's died than any other sport. Well, I think if you go back, you can look at a lot of sports, and there's been a lot of younger guys, even guys, okay, so they retired, but they retired when they were 35 or 38, and they end up dead when they're 40. Does that say that other sports don't have people that's been part of their sports that's died? You know, we're not, I hate to be singled out as a group, and I love what I do as a professional wrestler, but I don't think we get a fair shake on all this drug and death issues. We don't get a fair shake.
And you said you took steroids for a while. Did you ever notice, now it's about 30 years later, 25 years later, since you stopped taking steroids, did you ever notice any side effects, just maybe tell us, so if there's a young wannabe wrestler watching right now, maybe to,
Well, I don't got 22-inch pythons anymore, but
but otherwise,
other than, shriveling back to being a normal sized guy that I would have been anyway.
you were never a real abuser.
I did everything in moderation, other than sometimes I took the hard liquor a little bit too far and mixed it with the other things. So I've lived in the shadow of that death walk and came out of it okay many a time, and I'm to be thankful for that.
You could thank the Lord.
Praise the Lord. Pass the collection plate. Anyway, but as far as young guys and young people breaking into any sport, I think you can achieve success without doing something illegal. Now, because it is illegal, you got to keep in mind the things we were doing other than hard narcotics were legal. And we had prescriptions. I had prescriptions.
It came from a doctor. It wasn't
I had my prescriptions for the steroids, and I didn't over-abuse. Have I felt anything out of it? Not that I know of. I know my liver was tested last year and a half ago. My levels were extremely high. That came out of my blood test. I haven't been back to be tested again because I haven't taken the time to be, clean body-wise from any kind of drinking or beers or something like that. And I don't smoke marijuana. I don't take steroids in the last 20 years. I haven't smoked marijuana in a year. I only did that when I was with somebody, and now I tell them I don't care about it. I don't even want it.
It's practically legal here if you have the card.
I haven't smoked a cigarette in 30 years. I think cigarettes are more damaging than anything a person can put in their body. And if I could say anything to anybody, it's, don't over abuse anything. We all have our habits. We all have our demons. Just try to stay moderate. What's inside of me right now because of what I did, I do not know. And until I get checked and thoroughly checked, I won't find out.
So back to the actual wrestling part of your WWE time. You had Jimmy Hart managing you. Sometimes you came out with Peggy Sue, who was either Jimmy Hart in drag or Sherry Bartel. Who came up with the idea to have Jimmy Hart in drag, and what was it like having Sherry Bartel manage you? Why wasn't it continued?
Having Sherry was a chore. I can say that because she's not here to defend herself, God bless her. But I liked Sherry, and I always had fun with her, and she was a great lady wrestler, and she was dedicated to wrestling, but she let her demons take over her, and eventually the demons overtook her for good. She was a chore as far as being Peggy Sue because she would show up late for TV interviews, and we would have to wait, and we'd lose our spot in line. We might be scheduled for 2 o'clock. She'd show up at 4. Well, they had other guys scheduled, so now we got to wait because of her. Excuse me. So I would give her my peace of mind sometimes, and so would Sergeant Relay Goulet. I mean, sometimes it wasn't the best language in the world as the way we talked to her about being on time.
She was one of the boys.
Yes, she was. She was one of the boys. So we take that with a grain of salt. And then as the Peggy Sue thing started to go into its later part of that run with Beefcake and different guys, they wanted her to be more of a feature girl wrestler, so she was put on the cards then to wrestle in different cards around the country where I wasn't. Well, we still needed the Peggy Sue, so we just took her costume. Jimmy can be Peggy Sue, so he would dress up like Peggy Sue, and Beefcake would put me in the sleeper, and I was almost out, and Jimmy or Peggy Sue would come in, and like you said, Jimmy dressed in drag, and Beefcake would drop me, grab Jimmy by the wig, pull it off. Oh, it's Jimmy Hart. Reach into the blouse. We'd stuff the brassiere with the toilet tissue, and Beefcake would throw the toilet tissue out. And the fans went crazy over it. Then stripped the skirt off, and Jimmy's got on a pair of pantyhose with his boxer briefs or whatever. He's running all covered up, and it was a great piece of television. It was great work.
While you're on the subject of Colonel Jimmy Hart, do you want to tell us about what it was like working with him?
He pushed me every day that I didn't want to go and do something. He would have me up at 4, 5, 6 in the morning to go do a radio, a TV, or do a call-in if we were on the West Coast. It's 4 in the morning. We need to call a station on the East Coast. He'd wait. He pushed me very hard. That I achieved success, that I owe a lot to him, because I probably wouldn't have pushed myself that hard. And he was very good about the drug stuff, because he never smoked, he never drank. I mean, the only thing he ever had was a Coca-Cola and a bag of potato chips. I don't know how he lived. But he was that kind of guy that I respected him enough that I would have my 6-pack of beers on the way back or back in the hotel, but I never took drugs and things in front of him. I never took steroids, anything in front of him. I had respect for him that way. Did he know I was doing them? Who knows? I mean, I never told him.
So he was a good influence on you.
Yes. I mean, he kept me away from that evil element.
If it had been you and Sherry on the road,
It wouldn't have worked out at all. We would have missed some towns and got fired. And Jimmy was a very stickler. Let me say this about being early. If they need us there at noon, we'll be there at 11. If we got to be at the airport at 7, we'll be there at 5. I mean, he taught me more about being punctual and being on time and doing all this extra media work that means so much to keep that name Honky Tonk Man buried in people's minds. And that's the reason I started with this greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. And it stuck in people's mind.
people still recognize you everywhere.
Right.
I remember driving with you the one time and the car passed us and then it slowed down and they took the picture of you.
Yeah, but it's like I said, it's the media that Jimmy Hart pushed me to do this, and it kept both of us alive.
So you had the feud with Jake, and then shortly after that, you got the opportunity to take the Intercontinental title from a man who WWE likes us to think was a big star at the time, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
He held the belt for how many? Okay, he won it
In WrestleMania 3.
at end of March, and he lost it first week of June. So that's April, May, first week of June. 8 weeks. He had the belt for 8 or 9 weeks, and they want you to believe he was this super character. Ricky was a great wrestler in the ring, a good interview, solid, but he was not an Intercontinental Champion for only 8 weeks. I didn't know until after Macho Man passed away that Macho Man held the belt. I had it for 15 months. I think he held it for 14, almost as long. But I didn't know that because it was never publicized that way.
Do you think, first of all, what were the circumstances of Ricky Steamboat's departure from WWE?
Him and his wife were going through some problems, I think, and she wanted him to be off the road because he'd been on the road just like us, 60, 70 days straight, 3 days off, 2 days off. She wanted him home. They had a new baby, and he succumbed to the pressure of a home life instead of now, you're the Intercontinental Champion, and it's time for you to really get out there and push and make some money. And he wanted time off, and Vince just would not hear of that.
So Vince...
very politely said, okay, you need to drop the strap, and that was it. And they didn't know who he was going to drop it to, and they had Butch Reed in mind, and Butch was AWOL that night, so then it was Hogan and Vince were standing in the hallway talking. I was just coming for an interview segment, and had the jumpsuit on, had the hair all fixed and everything, and Hogan said, what about him? And Vince says, maybe so. And so he pulled me off to the side and gave me the rundown and told me what was going on and would I be interested in taking this belt and running with it. And I reminded him, Vince, the day you hired me, I told you that if you give me a chance and I make money, pay me. If I don't make any money for you, then you can give me my walking papers right away. And I said, this is my chance to prove it to you.
Was there rematches after your title victory?
Very few. We had, Ricky and I were in the Garden twice, I think, which was 2 months back to back, and that might have been it. We might have did Boston maybe once or twice. We only had like 3 or 4 return matches. Yeah.
So in those days, there was usually 3 towns being run
Yeah.
every night.
3
by
towns.
WWE alone. And when you were Intercontinental Champion, and even after that, you were headlining usually the B shows.
B shows.
And what were the crowds on the shows?
Sold out. We were sold out. Hogan might be in Boston Garden, 18,000 sold out. Macho Man and I, or Jake the Snake, if he was there. Now, Jake was around for a little while, but then Jake would go on hiatus, so then I'd get beat every night in a house show with a substitute. But when Randy and I had our run together, we might be in L.A., there'd be 18,000 there. We'd go to Miami, it was sold out. Hogan would go to Seattle, it was sold out. We'd go to Winnipeg, have 10,000 people in Winnipeg, which was unheard of because Winnipeg wasn't a huge draw for anyone back then. Then we would go to San Antonio, sold out. Wherever Randy and I went with the card we had, it would be sold out. And then wherever Hogan went, it was sold out. So Vince had it made. He had two A shows going as opposed to A, B, and C. And even those C towns, those smaller Scranton, Pennsylvanias, those smaller Brampton, Ontarios, or Mississauga for our Canadian fans, where he didn't run Toronto that night, but a month later he might run Mississauga or Brampton, Brantford. I always mix it up. But anyway, they would be sold
All
out.
Toronto. And
Just that's a suburb of Toronto.
Yeah. But yeah, it's all around the area of Toronto. So you were talking about your feud with Savage a little bit. That was a great feud. People still talk about it. Can you tell us about your memories of that feud?
Randy was extreme professional. We weren't close friends. I felt like we were friendly. It was a professional friendship. He didn't mix friends with business too much. He was a very hard guy to get to know. Once you did get to know him a little bit, he was a great guy. He was fantastic in the ring. Him and I, we clicked. Our gears clicked very well together. Did we have the easiest matches in the world? No, because a lot of times we didn't have good support on some of the cards we were on. A lot of times we were put on at different stages of the card where we should have been the main event or semi-main event, and we were like right after the popcorn match. But we overcame it because he was good enough to overcome it, and I was good enough to work with him to overcome it. We interjected Liz into our matches, which he never would do with anyone else. But he trusted me, and he trusted that everything's going to be okay. And we had a really good, solid lot of matches for almost a year.
Now, a lot of people sometimes say Randy was crazy and stuff for being so protective of Liz, but do you want to talk about a bit what the dressing room's like in that day with a group of rowdy guys that have been on the road forever away from their wives and are probably not being faithful to their wives, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the back. So in my opinion, he probably did the right thing by protecting her so much. Do you have what's your opinion on all that?
I think I agree with you to the setup of the question, yes. And yes, I agree that he should have protected her because dealing with this cast of characters, as you laid the setup for the question, was a challenge for even guys in the locker room to deal with these characters, and no matter what they had been doing the night before, 10 minutes before they got to the matches, what kind of person is going to walk through the locker room door? Sometimes the locker rooms in some of these small towns, it was hard for Randy to be that kind of, show that protectionism to her. And she was a gorgeous young lady. I mean, she was beautiful. And here's Randy with this wild hair and wild eyes and woo, yeah. How they ever got together, I do not know. But that's neither here nor there. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But some of these smaller locker rooms, there wasn't a place for her. And so eventually, as time went on and Randy got more power, he was able then to force upon Vince to move us out of a locker room and put us in the hallway, and he would take Liz and put her in the locker room and take the key and lock her. I didn't really like him locking her in the room because if there was a fire or something, he'd go do interviews and she wasn't involved, or he'd go do something, a TV station outdoors or remote. She was locked in the building. I never thought that was the best way to do it. I mean, he could have left a key with her, but mind you, that's how Randy was, and he got a lot of backstabbing. He got a lot of back talk from guys whispering about it and everything. But I never did. I thought he handled it professional.
Now, I'm not sure if you ever saw this, but the Ultimate Warrior put out a video shortly after Randy's death in response to Hogan coming out and saying that they had made up, when, from everyone I've talked to, they hadn't made up at the time of Randy's death. And the Warrior put out a video of Hulk Hogan on a European talk show saying that Randy had a cage built around the front door of his house that he would lock Elizabeth in, so he would leave her 6 TV dinners, I think, was Hogan's line. Is there any truth?
I've heard that nonsense. I mean, only and like I'm not going to take a cheap shot at people that are not here to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, Randy's not with us anymore. Liz's not with us.
That's just rumor.
Unless Lanny came forward and told something that he knew behind the scenes, which he probably would never do, because he's that kind of a gentleman. I heard those stories about cameras being around the house, but look, anybody that reached the level that Randy did probably would want cameras around their house if his wife is at home and he's out on the road. I mean, I would. I had a security system in my house when I was on the road to protect my wife and children.
Do you think that was more just the feud, the real life feud of Hogan and Savage, and Hogan thought, oh, this is going to be on TV?
Probably. I do believe that Liz, when she wanted to go somewhere, that Randy's mom and dad lived down the street and they would take her because Randy didn't want her out by herself. She was a well-known character too. She was as popular as anybody. She was probably the most popular female since Fabulous Moolah.
Right.
I mean, there's been nobody else in the business that came close to Liz's popularity. So she couldn't go places like, I couldn't go places. I definitely didn't walk around the streets with my hair fixed and wearing a jumpsuit. There was places I would never go out to bars, and sometimes I wouldn't go to restaurants.
So back to Randy himself, as a wrestler, as far as wrestling ability, promo ability, drawing ability, do you think he's right up there as one of the greatest of all time?
Oh, yes. No, I don't think anybody could touch some of those promos he did when he was, space is the police, yeah. And he would twist and he'd turn and he would do his fingers. And he was very animated in his promos. And I learned a lot by watching him and by watching Hogan and different guys. The more animated you are in your promo, the more people really listen, the more they start to watch and listen to you. And his in-ring stuff was, Randy worked a fast pace. Randy worked one of these, knock me down. If he went down, he was right back up. If he went off the top rope, he came off the top, he hit you, boom, and he was right back into something else. He had that speed about him, and he had that athleticism that was a lot of guys at that time didn't have.
So a lot of people like to talk about Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair being the greatest of all time. Do you think Savage?
I think he deserves equal credit. Equal. I know this. I know that a lot of times Hogan got flack and still does because they say, well, he didn't do anything but do this, and all he did was drop the leg and hulk up. Well, he didn't have to do anything else. Could he have done other things? Sure. Go watch matches with him and Harley Race. Him and I had a couple of matches together, and it wasn't the regular Hulk Hogan match. We interjected Jimmy Hart. Jimmy jumped on his back, all sorts of stuff. We did everything. Randy could put a match together, too, that got the best out of Hulk. And Randy could get the best. And Randy would never he never really, really liked to do the same match in the town. If we were there last month, let's change it. Let's don't do it again. If we were on TV and they saw this, let's change it. He did not like that. Whereas a Ric Flair, I mean, even Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler would say, oh, come on, Rick, not that bump over the top. Oh, coach. Oh, no, he's going to get it slammed again. Rick, it never works. It was like he never changed. It was always the same.
So you just brought up Hulk Hogan again. Now that you're having your run and you're a legitimate superstar at this time, definitely a main event player.
SWAT teams.
Oh.
You just mentioned Hogan. That's where we start.
Yep.
Yeah. To the bathroom here.
I might have to have one of those Heinekens. Can you believe that lady came in here twice after we told her we're shooting TV? I mean, the first time's bad enough. Then she walks in front of the camera.
In front of it. And she's
It's
stood
not
there
like-
folding the sheets on there. It's like
It's not like I need to be quiet. They're shooting TV. Oh, I'll just walk right in front of the camera.
Yeah, I won't walk behind. I'll just go. Oh.
I mean, what if you're like paying your a portrait studio like $500 to shoot good pictures of you, and she just walked in here and messed up the photo shoot?
Yeah.
What if we were shooting porn in here?
Yeah. We'll need a few more views for that.
Same setup.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just need someone on top of you.
That's
Well, good answer so far.
different, totally different than any of the other stuff that I've done as far as the shoot style stuff, and that's what makes it better because it's more. Listen, some of those shoot things, I take those DVDs, I can't sell them at the matches because I have to tell people these are X-rated. Oh well, my kids
Yeah.
wanted to watch them.
Well,
See,
we can work something out with getting them copies of this.
see, these aren't X-rated by any means.
No. But, and also, as I said, we want history from somewhere other than WWE.
Right.
Because
Right.
right now, they present all of history.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just Ricky Steamboat was this great superstar. Well, he just works for your friggin' company.
That's all. Everybody that works there's had a everybody that works there's had a DVD.
Have you ever seen a Ricky Steamboat promo? Most people don't even remember that you beat him for the belt.
I know that they remember who I lost to, but not who I won, who I
Well,
beat.
we'll get into him after.
Alright.
All right, so now that you're a bona fide main event superstar in the WWE, selling out all over the place alongside of Hogan, how was your relationship with him at this point?
Very good. We had as far as being a friend relationship, I thought we were closer as a friendship than Randy and I, and it wasn't until we got to the WCW days that'll come up later, I'm sure, that we became not friends anymore. He was always very cordial to me. He was always very nice to me. He was always, "Hey, honky tonk man, what's up?" And he loved to listen to my interviews. I mean, he might be in the room sitting there, and he liked watching the stuff we did in the ring. He loved the matches myself and Macho Man had, because deep down inside he wanted to have those kind of matches. He wanted to go out and do all those kind of things, but I mean, the guy, he didn't have to do it. There was no way that him and Kamala could go out and have those kind of matches. There was no way that him and the one-man gang could go, or the Big Boss Man, have those kind of matches, because he was programmed with these big superheroes. And us guys that were 6 foot, 6'1", we didn't really get that big chance with him. It was guys that was 6'3", 6'4", and he had to work a big man's match.
Now, around the late 80s, there was a big fight between Adrian Adonis and Danny Spivey in the locker room. Were you around for that?
Every fight that was in the locker room, I missed. I was not there to see Iron Mike Sharp and Billy Jack Haynes, which was what I understand was a deadly fight where Billy.
Can you tell us about that? 'Cause
I only have secondhand information where Billy Jack and Iron Mike Sharp, something happened, and Mike Sharp had rubbed Billy Jack the wrong way, and Billy was a short fuse anyway, short time bomb, and Billy just started. They got into it, and one punch was thrown, and then and Iron Mike Sharp was a tough guy, but Billy Jack was tougher at that night, that day in the locker room, and from what I understand, he beat him up really bad. And the Adrian thing, I understand that Danny Spivey had already told Adrian and said, "Look, don't go out there and do this to me anymore." I guess Adrian was, riding him pretty hard, taking liberties with him, kicking him hard, hitting him hard. He says, "I'm telling you, man, if you do this again, I'm going to have to straighten you out." So when they got back to the locker room, Danny said, "Man, why are you doing this to me?" And I guess words went to another word, and next thing you know, they're going at it. And Danny Spivey was not a guy to mess with, and he was a legitimate tough guy in Tampa. I mean, he bounced in the bars. He did a little strong arming and stuff, and bill collecting and all kind of things. He was the nice, quietest, mellow person you'd ever want to meet. But his nickname after that was Dangerous Dan, the left-hand man, because he was left-handed. And he beat Adrian up really bad. Adrian had to take about a week off.
Now,
And then the Dynamite Kid thing,
I was
that was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and happened in the lunchroom. And I was down with Jimmy Hart, and we were doing interviews. And somebody says, "You ain't gonna believe it, Jacques Rougeau just knocked Dynamite Kid's teeth out." What? And we got up to the lunchroom. It had all been settled down. They had them separated. So I missed that one, and I missed the one where Dynamite Kid had punched Jock in the jaw and broke his jaw 6-8 weeks before that. Jock was playing cards, him and his brother with a couple of guys, Dino Bravo and some more people, I think, at a table in the Miami locker room. And Dynamite Kid just came in. Jock's got a handful of cards, pasted him right in the jaw.
Would you say Dynamite Kid was a bit of a bully in those days?
Yeah, he was. He pushed his weight around, and he pulled a lot of bad ribs on people. He was always nice to me and always treated me well until toward the end where he said he slapped me around the locker room, made me cry. Well, I'm glad Dinah Hart, or one of the Harts, did a book and said, you can't believe a word Dynamite Kid says. Everything he said and everything he says was a lie. So that, at least that never happened. Jimmy Hart was there, and he was...
At that point, you would have been fairly high up on the card. And
yeah.
on good terms with Hogan.
Yeah.
So if he had done something
Right,
like that,
right.
he would have been...
Well, I even saw him like the next, after that, and I saw him the next day, and he's walking along, and I said, I met him face to face, and I said, are we okay? Is there any more problems with us? He said no. He said
just
no.
To be clear, according to Dynamite Kid's book, he claimed that you had said something about Harley Race when you actually have tremendous respect for Harley Race. Did you,
Right.
in fact? Was it just
That was never, ever, where he heard that, I do not know, but Bobby Heenan made a joke about that. Guys laughed about it. I guess maybe he heard me laugh about it, and about Harley wearing the pouch on his back, on his side, and you couldn't give him the rear end bump because the pouch might break. And that was it. Harley, and I respect him as one of the nicest, sweetest guys in the world, and I would never have said anything bad about this man. And I even told Harley myself, I said, I don't care what, and I know he was very close to Dynamite Kid, but Dynamite Kid was going through enormous pain. At that point in time in his career, his back was going out. He had numbness in his leg. Harley took care of him, drove him to the airport, did all sorts of stuff. And they were close friends, but Harley would have done that for anybody. And Dynamite Kid was taking a lot of stuff, a lot of steroids, a lot of pain pills, and a lot of drinking. 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. He can say he didn't do it, but there's people in the bars around the country that were there at 9 in the morning, saw him. And so, he's going through his demons now and his problems, and I only wish the best for him. I wish him good luck.
And your last feud before dropping the Intercontinental title was with Brutus Beefcake. Can you tell us about that feud?
That was more of an entertainment type feud. It was not like Randy and I were more of a workers match and doing high spots and really getting hard heat and doing all these things and making people really get all worked up that Randy's going to finally win. I don't think that people really believed that Brutus was going to beat me, other than maybe Brutus might cut my hair. But we had entertainment in our matches. We were more entertaining. We put all the entertainment factor in.
And you were originally scheduled to face Brutus Beefcake at SummerSlam '88, I believe it was. What happened that changed?
Okay, the real story is this. They were going to program, they already knew that they were going to program me and Warrior's going to win the belt. That had been predetermined about 6 months ahead of time. We knew, and everything knew, which was all had been taken care of. Vince and I and the Warrior, and it was kind of a hush-hush, and nobody knew about it. It was kept quiet. I told Jimmy Hart, and then a couple more people knew that Warrior was going to win the belt. And other than that, that was it. I was still with Brutus, and they set an angle up where Outlaw Ron Bass injured Brutus, like the week before on the television taping. So then Brutus was injured and could not come out and have the match with me. So I went out and told the crowd, I don't care who it is. Just get me anybody. I don't care. Bring some. I came here to wrestle. I want somebody to wrestle. And get somebody out here. And they hit the Warriors music, and out he came, and the place exploded. It was my idea. Short match, 13, 20 seconds, whatever it was. Bing, bing, bing. Hit me here, hit me there. I take a bump, go back. You run, you do the big splash on me. 1, 2, 3, and the place went nuts. I mean, finally, after 15 months, someone had actually beat me.
So there was never any plans for Brutus?
No, Brutus never in the plan. Never.
It was set up?
It was total setup. Yeah. And it was set up perfectly.
Were you happy to do that for the Warrior at the time? Did you know he was going to go on to get a great, probably 4 or 5 year push after that?
I didn't think his push was going to go as long as you just said, the 4 or 5 years. But Vince had already told me when we sat down and had our conversation that he wanted to push this guy. He said, I see something in him. I see some electricity. I see something I can do something with. And I would like roll my eyes and, are you kidding me, Vince? He says, no. He said, I need someone to take Hogan's spot. Hogan's already wanting to go to L.A. and be a Hollywood movie star. And we got like an 8-month opportunity here to build this guy and get him in that spot. And he said, that's what I want to do if you do it for me. I said, whatever. I said, I'll be more than happy to. He said, I'm going to need some return matches. I went, oh, you're kidding me. Come on, Vince. If I can just get through one match. And so Vince says, I don't care. Just give me some return matches and get him over. You can work with a gal in the front row. He said, just get him over. I said, okay. So we had return matches, and they were quite good. We actually were able to put together a match that was good. The short match that I had where I lost the belt, it didn't hurt me. The people still hated me. My hatred, my heat carried on. Because I could just go on TV and say, hey, he didn't beat me. How was he even supposed to wrestle him? That belt belongs to me. It's mine. It was good for the company because they needed someone, and it was good for Warrior to go very short. Anything longer would have exposed both of us, and it wouldn't have helped the company. As time went on, then he became a very good worker. Rick Rude took him and made him an extremely better worker. Then he had the match with Hogan, and he was world champion. And then, and he's thanked me. Warrior has actually been one of the few people who said, thank you so much.
And in later years, I believe around '96, he had a little comeback match on an independence show, and he actually chose you to work with him.
Yeah.
So a lot of people like to throw jabs at the Ultimate Warrior, but he really did have great promo skills, and he was able to pop a crowd. What's your opinion of him as a wrestler in the end? Because there have been a lot of wrestlers that maybe not have deserved their spots, but at least the Warrior worked pretty hard at it, and he did have some talent.
He spent a lot of time working on his character. He had costumes made. He spent money on his character. He developed his interview skills that matched his character. I think the one impact he had most of all was this body that he had, this painted face, this colorful outfit, and when the music played, it was like hearing the Stone Cold glass breaking. Everyone knew this was the Ultimate Warrior. And when he came through the curtain and ran down and shook the ropes and ran back and forth, he brought energy. He brought electricity to that crowd. That's something that Vince had seen that I really didn't see, because all I'd seen was boring matches with him and Hercules Hernandez where it was just beat on each other for 10 minutes and finally somebody wins. And there was no rhyme or reason to what they did out there. Hercules told me one night, he said, I'm just trying to survive, man. He said, I'm just trying to keep this guy off of me.
Was he stiff to work with?
Very extremely. But we got all that worked out as time went on, and he became very good. See, the thing was, and if Red Bastien was here right now, I would say, Red, you did this business a total injustice because you dumped about 5 guys out of your training school, out of California, onto this business that weren't ready to be dumped into this business. Sting, who went on to be a great wrestler and a good wrestler and a huge draw. Ultimate Warrior, a boy named Steve DeSalvo, Steve never really understood this business. And another boy, Angel of Death that passed away not long ago. Another big guy, two-sport All-American from North Dakota. His name passes me by. And I think there was one more of those bodybuilder guys out of California that didn't even make it to a territory. I think he went to Memphis or somewhere and just finally quit. But these guys were dumped out here on the wrestling world, not really knowing anything about pro wrestling. And they just went and hammered people. It was kind of like Eddie Sharkey throwing the Road Warriors out. Go ahead, guys. And they just beat up on people till they learned how to work. I think a Road Warrior will tell you, I think it's even in his book, we just went out and beat people up.
Yeah. So the next feud you had after Warrior would have been with Snuka, I believe.
Yeah. C cards.
What was it like working with him? And he's had a lot of demons throughout his career. Was he under a lot of the influence of those demons during the time that you worked with him?
When Jimmy came back and was programmed, and I asked for that, I did. I went to Vince and I asked for that program simply because now I've been demoted and I wanted to at least stay up the card and not be back down there on the opening, second, third matches and whatever the case might be. So I said, if you need somebody to work with Jimmy, I'd be more than happy to. And I never worked with him. And he was very much like Ricky Steamboat in the ring. Very, very gentle, good high spots, good, slow, deliberate 20, 30-minute matches. Was his demons bothering him? At that point, him and the Warrior were together and they were riding and working out, and Jimmy was in great shape. Whatever he did away from the building, I never knew. Sometimes his chops came pretty close to my nose, and one night here in Phoenix, well, we're in Phoenix now, right down the street at the Fairgrounds building, Jimmy had been coming off giving me the splash, and he had bad triceps and bad knees, and he said, "Brother, you got to raise up and catch me." I got a torn pec, Jimmy. My pec's hanging down here. I can't even swim, and I can't even lift my babies and roll over in bed without doing like this. So I said, "I can't catch you." So every time he came off, the back of my head would hit. Oh, and I had the worst headache coming into Phoenix. It had been 4 days. My head was pounding. I was taking codeine pills. I was taking anything, and my head. Now I know what a concussion feels like. My head was pounding. We go out, we have the match. The ending of the match is going to be Jimmy's going to do the leapfrog. I hit the ropes, come back. He drops down. Yeah! Gives me the chop. I take the bump. Picks me up, gives me the slam. Anyway, hit me right across the nose. Whap! Now the blood's pouring out of both nostrils. Picks me up, slams me. My head is pounding. The blood is gushing out. He slams me, comes off. Splash. I don't even move. I just lay there. Knocked the breath out of me. The referee was Earl Hebner. He said he came back to the locker room. It's the first time I ever saw my little son cry. He was crying, taking off my boots because the blood was just pouring. And Earl Hebner came back to the locker room. He said, "Dang, it looked like somebody stomped a tomato out there." Because when Jimmy hit me, the blood just went. But I had to call the office after that. The next day we were going to Minneapolis, and I called Vince, and I said, "Vince, I'm not refusing to finish," because I knew back then my time was limited. But if I refused, they would just fire me. I said, "Vince, I'm not refusing to do the finish, but if there's any way that we can do something else." Jimmy does a great headbutt, and it won't hurt him, and it's really good. And I just with the pec till my pec gets better, to splash on me, it's really hurting me. And he said, "Sure, there's a million finishes."
That's great. And did you ever hear the story of Stuka supposedly killing his ex-girlfriend?
Heard that story. It circulated around the wrestling world for years, and nothing ever happened on it. I think she might have stumbled and fell off the balcony or something. And I don't think Jimmy had anything to do with that. I don't believe that at all. I know Jimmy too well. I know he's not that kind of person. And you mentioned how was it working with him? Well, we went down to the sea towns on the small clubs, the small wrestling shows, but we sold him out because Jimmy had been a big star there. But Jimmy had walked out on Vince, and Vince's punishment was to bring him back. He did put him over me, but he was headlining the C shows, which gave me C show money, Not as good as B show money, not as good as A show, but a really good living. For that 4 or 5 months I was with him, then he passed Jimmy up to Mr. Perfect, and then Jimmy got beat every night by Mr. Perfect.
And you mentioned your nose got broken. Obviously, there was blood in that match. But sometime around the late 80s, according to numerous wrestling books out there, including Dynamite Kid and Bret Hart's, there was actually a no-blood policy in the WWE around the late 80s. Did you ever hear about this policy where you would be fined $500 for bleeding on purpose?
No, that I never heard about, because that was something you didn't do unless you were told by the promoter to do. You don't just go out there and do that unless you're one of these other guys that we'll talk about later on. But no, I remember when I came into the WWF and our interview with Vince, I had been doing ladder matches with Leo Burke and guys, and my head was all red and scraped up from the razor blade and everything, and I had my hair pulled down over so Vince couldn't see it. Anyway, Dynamite and Davey and Brett and Jim, they were doing cage matches at the time I got interviewed, and they were getting, double juice, one on each guy every night.
Because Dynamite mentioned in his book that they put the policy in place right after that.
Yeah. So anyway, I came to, well, at least he thank you, Dynamite. You told us the truth on that one. But anyway, so I got my hair covered, and Vince pulls my hair up, and he says, "We don't do that kind of stuff here anymore." And I'm thinking, they're having a cage match tonight. But after those cage matches, it stopped. There was no more of that.
And your last feud as a singles wrestler, I guess, would have been with Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream.
American Dream. Laziest American Dream I've ever been in the ring with. I mean, this guy, mind you, Dusty was always overweight and Dusty was always in control. And he always had short matches. This time it wasn't a short match. They wanted him over, but he was given his notice to leave. I don't know why they wouldn't have put me over and let me win the match, but anyway, he's leaving, going to work for Turner for WCW, or NWA back then, I guess, and he was leaving, but yet I had to go out there, and I think, Jimmy Hart, I think, hit me with the guitar. Dusty moves, Jimmy hits me, and I fall back 1, 2, 3. It was a terrible match. It was at SummerSlam in New Jersey.
What do you think of him as a person?
I think if he opens his mouth, he's probably lying. I mean, he told me, he told Coco, he told Dino Bravo, even that day in the locker room after our match, and we were getting dressed, he said, guys, I'll give my notice and everything, and anytime you guys want to come down there, just let me know, because we were all pretty much, Coco was on his way out, Dino had given notice, he was leaving. Anyway, I never called him, but Coco did call him, and he wouldn't take his call. I said, well, that's really nice. I told Coco later on, I said, that's really nice. He told all three of us, here's my number. He'd call that office when I get in there if you guys got a job. Well, we didn't have one.
So after that feud, you ended up as tag team partners with Greg Valentine. What led to that? And who came up with the rhythm and blues gimmick?
The Rhythm and Blues name, Rick Rude, we were in the locker room, and we were about 5 minutes before going out for a TV USA cable TV match. I think we were going to wrestle Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels back then. Anyway, Greg, they brought the hair dye, and he dyed his hair black, and they were going to they had finished, Greg was pretty much finished with his run and his singles matches, and was not doing a whole lot. And Greg had always been a stable around there, because he, him and Pat got along really well. And Pat Patterson, I'm talking about, who was doing most of the booking, and they always kept Greg, kept him a job no matter what. Even after the Dream Team, he went into singles when him and Beefcake were together. Then he was not doing a whole lot, so they wanted to do something, so they rejuvenated him and I with this tag team, which I thought was really good. We had a ton of heat because his black hair, but Rick Rude was sitting there, and Pat said, we need a name for you guys. We got to call you something. And Rick Rude said, well, he pointed to me, he said, he's Rhythm, and he's always half asleep. He's Blues. Pat said, that's it, Rhythm and Blues. And he went and he told Gorilla Monsoon, that's it, that's her name, Rhythm and Blues.
And you feuded a lot with the Hart Foundation. Do you have any memories of those matches?
Rhythm and Blues was scheduled to take the belts from the Harts. At sometime shortly before or after the Road Warriors, once Vince got the Road Warriors secured and they were coming in, our chances of getting the belts, he'd promised them then to the Road Warriors. That was their deal. He had told us we were going to do a program and win the belts from the Harts. He said, you guys have got more heat than anybody. Vince loved heels that had heat. And with me being the razzmatazz guy, the show business, and now I've influenced this real wrestler, Greg Valentine, this tough guy, to dye his hair and Greg to stand there and pick a guitar. It was like the people hated me more, and now they hated him more than he could have ever done as Greg the Hammer Valentine. And then Jimmy Hart being there. So the wheels were very good for that tag team. And we would have been a good tag team with the belts. But once they got to Road Warriors, there was too many tag teams, and he was doing business with the Powers of Pain. He had Demolition. He had so many tag teams that we were behind the 8-ball.
You actually did main event a few shows. I remember.
Yes.
Particularly, there was a very good
Yeah.
crowd at the Civic Center in Ottawa. You had a 2 out of 3 falls match with the Hart Foundation, so you drew decent houses in those years too. Did you ever wrestle Legion of Doom?
No. The only other tag team we wrestled was the Bushwhackers. That was pretty much it, and that was a comedy match.
So it was a fun time.
It was fun. But Greg and I tried to make the best out of this tag team as we could in the ring. He really didn't like having his hair black, and he didn't really get into what he could have put. Now he says, I wish I'd have put more into it. He says he wish he would have put more into that tag team because they might have took a better look at us.
Do you think he has problems with depression?
All the time, extremely. I mean, there's not a day goes by that this man's not depressed about something.
Do you think if he'd had kind of a better attitude, he would have gone further in his later years?
I think so. I think he wouldn't have caused some of the problems that he's caused for some promoters and done some of the things he's done. And, he even went the religious route at one time and was toting the Bible, but he said he couldn't stop double booking. He couldn't stop lying. I said, well, you don't have to have the Bible to stop double booking and stop lying. Just stop doing it. But anyway, we've always had a good rapport and everything. And there was occasions where he's done some things where I even called him and I said, look, if you don't take care of this guy, you're never going to work there again. And it's happened a couple of times. He said, can you cover this up and take care of this guy for me? I said, I can't until you call the guy and pay him back his money or something.
Yeah, I definitely noticed there's two sides to his personality. There's a very nice side to his personality that's very likable, and there's a terrible side. Yeah,
it's like I said, I get this bad reputation about doing these shoot interviews where everybody thinks I shouldn't do that, but in reality, I'm not that bad person that a lot of the guys in this business think I am. I'm not that kind of guy. I wouldn't do anything to hurt somebody's family or to just blatantly go out and hurt somebody's feelings or to try to stab them in the back to take their position. I could care less about that. I'm going to make it on my own merits.
One thing I can say about you is your name brings a smile to most people's faces when it's brought up.
Well, yes, it's. I don't know if that smile's a frown turned upside down, or a handshake. You better be careful of the stab in the back. So I mean, I never had a reason to do that. I don't. The things I say about guys and the things that I've said. Sure, could I have been more politically correct? Absolutely. But is it something that I could do with my personality? No. It's not me.
So at the end of your first big WWE run, you were a commentator for Superstars, which was a very popular show back then.
Yep.
How did that come about? And I personally thought you were doing very well at it, and what led to it?
After the Rhythm and Blues, they cut Greg loose, sent him to Japan. They got him a Japan trip for Inoki, sent him over to Japan, and Vince told me, he says, we're going to do something different with you. we don't have any spot for Greg. There's really not a spot for you guys in the tag team, but I want you to come and you're a great man on the microphone. I think you can do great things behind the camera. And I said, well, I told him, I said, Vince, I'm not sure if I'm ready to go behind the camera because I had some gas left in me. The tank wasn't empty. And he says, no, I think you'll be wonderful at it. What I didn't know was it's going to be a three-man team. Vince, Daffy Duck, Roddy Piper, that you can't get a word in edgewise when he's talking, and myself. So I felt like I was really the odd man out in that crew, even though I struggled to try to make it work. And a lot of people said it was good. A lot of people say, hey, a three-man team doesn't work well. And in most cases, it doesn't work well. But it will work if you have three guys who are on the same page. Roddy wanted to continue to be Roddy. He wanted to talk for an hour. And it didn't matter if he put the heels over or he put the baby faces over. He kind of took the middle of the road on everything.
Now, Roddy's been very open on his drug use in his career. At the time when he was commentating with you, do you think it was on one of the higher levels of use or lower levels? What was he like to work with other than that?
I've never seen a change in the guy. He's always been, hey, good to see you. How you doing? How's your family? As if he cares. My dad just passed away. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Oh, you're not really sorry. You never even knew him. I mean, come on, Roddy. But his interviews were always that up-tempo, hyper kind of activity. That might have just been his way. And was he doing something out of the ordinary? I don't know. I never saw him.
So after you were released, which you just mentioned, WCW was picking up steam at the time. They were signing a lot of ex-WWE wrestlers. Was there any immediate talk of you going to WCW?
No, it was almost 9 months later, I think, 9 or 10 months. I really didn't talk to them till like August, and I was left WWE in December, around Christmas time of 1990, and I didn't have talks with them until about 9 months later. And Eric Bischoff told me on our first meeting that he didn't like my gimmick. He was never a fan of mine, but to keep Jimmy Hart quiet, I have to bring you in because he's driving me nuts. And I said, well, I hope I can change your mind. And after that, I knew my days were numbered. And he promised me a contract, and then all of a sudden he wants me to start doing jobs for Johnny B. Bad. And nothing against Mark Merrill or Johnny B. Bad, but look, those guys had $350,000, $400,000 contracts. I'm working for $1,000 a day. I'm not going to go out there and do jobs.
So you had a nightly deal?
Yeah, I had a nightly, whatever, and I worked like 2 nights a week sometimes, 1 night a week. They'd fly me all the way from Phoenix to Atlanta. I'd come in, I'd do one 30-second interview, get paid $1,000, get on a plane, go back home.
You were on a couple pay-per-views
during
that time.
Yeah.
So really, your heart wasn't into it. You were doing it for the page.
Nah, yeah, my first pay-per-view was in Detroit, and I was on the first match with Johnny B. Bad. This is where Hogan and myself, our friendship started to very rapidly deteriorate because I thought he was more in charge. And I pulled him into the shower room, and I said, hey, what's the deal here, man? What do you mean? I said, I have been the main event in Detroit in this same building and sold it out 20 times over. I'm on the first match, and I'm going 15 minutes with Johnny B. Bad. I'm doing a time limit Broadway, a draw. And he says, hey, brother, it ain't my call. Ain't nothing I can do. I said, well, if you can't do anything, then nobody can. So that started the downfall and the deterioration of mine and his friendship.
Why does Eric Bischoff say you were his most favorite person to fire?
I'm flattered by that. I really am. I think I thought it was the best thing he could say. He actually said it on WWE Raw TV, I think, once. He put it in his book. Why he hated to fire me, I do not know. I do not know why this man never liked me. I never said anything bad about him until he wrote it in his book. I never said anything negative towards him in any way until he said the one guy that I love firing the most, and he fired a lot of guys there. I must have done something to him somewhere that made him despise me. Well, if he hated me that much, imagine how the people would have hated me and how much I could have done for his company and for him being in WCW as the main guy. And at that point, by then, he wanted me to job to Johnny B. Bad again on one of their big Saturday night shows out of Nashville. And I went to Hogan again, and I said, this is utterly ridiculous. I said, what's the deal with this anyway? Am I here I said, I came here to help you. I didn't come here because I had anything invested. I don't have a contract. I have nothing. I said, I'm going to go out there and lay down for this kid on national TV.
And just to explain to people that might not know this, one of the reasons why you were mad about jobbing was because you didn't have a contract and you still have to make a living for yourself on the independent circuit. It's not because you really didn't want a job, but it was lessening your value on
Yes.
the independent circuit since you weren't under contract.
Totally being devalued on the independents. And that's what I explained to Eric Bischoff after Hogan had told me, when I said, hey, I'm an independent. I don't have a contract. These guys, I said, I'm going out here. He's got $350,000 contract. I said, I'm making $1,000 to do this job. And Hogan said, hey, brother, I'm just here to serve. I said, well, if you're just here to serve, that's the same shit you told me in Detroit 3 months ago. I said, if you can't help me, then it's over. I went to Bischoff. I said, Eric, you got a minute? He comes outside, stands up against the wall, sticks his chest out. Yeah. I said, I'm not doing that job. He said, well, if you don't do the job, then you can't work here for us. I said, I would love to do it, Eric, but I'm not one of your players. I don't have a contract. If I had a contract, I'd go out there and do anything you wanted. He said, well, if you don't go do this job, you're definitely not getting a contract. I said, what guarantee do I have if I go out and do this job tonight, that when I walk back through the curtain, you don't go, you're fired? He said, you don't have one. I said, well, then I'm not doing it. He said, you did jobs for Vince. I said, yes, but he paid me. And he paid me very well for those jobs. Well, if you don't do that, you might as well pack your bag. I said, my bag's already packed. I got a cab waiting. I said, you couldn't carry Vince's jockstrap. And I walked out.
And later, I think it was rumored that you actually lost for WCW in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
It was definitely over $100
Yeah.
million in a year. Could you lose $100 million if you tried in 1 year?
No. So that, to me, is their mentality. And he even told me, he said, I'll get you a good contract on the day that I met him. I want to get you a good contract, but I need to clear up some of these bad contracts that have been left on me. But he said, then I'll get. But there was guys who were getting renewed who didn't even work there. They stayed home and got their check. Some of them.
Manny was employed for 3 years without working.
He never even showed up there and got a paycheck. And it's nothing against the wrestlers. I'm glad they got the money. I'm glad they took these people's money, because these people deserve to be raped. They deserved it. To not watch over your wallet. I mean, I thought Ted Turner was smarter than that. I thought he would have had someone up in the executive office that would have looked at the books and said, this company, Ted's losing $100 million a year. We're giving money to people who don't even show up at the building. We don't even know if they're still alive.
Or they would send people to buildings and not use them. Send
Yeah.
40 guys to an
Yeah.
event.
I had one guy, and well, he's not around anymore. Brad Armstrong. Brad came down to the building one day. He said, I don't want him to see me. He said, the only reason I came down is I want to make sure that my name is on a sheet of paper so that they know I still work here, because my contract's getting renewed next week. I said, really? And he told me, he said, yeah, it's for like $150,000. He said, I've been home for a year. And you know what?
What?
Next time I saw him, I did an independent show about 2 years later. I said, did your contract? He said, yeah, they renewed me for 2 more years.
And they had the Ted Turner machine, the Turner Broadcasting machine.
Everything.
behind them. They had everything, all the tools they needed to succeed. But who really killed WCW the most?
Well, I can't say that it was Eric Bischoff, because someone had to be above him. And whoever was above him destroyed the company, because they let him do whatever he wanted to. Now, mind you, they had some success in the ratings with the NWO stuff. I'm not going to take that away from them. But the overall picture, it was a losing company. I mean, the day they closed the doors on it, they were so happy. They said, guess what? We didn't lose $100 million this year. We only lost $80. Oh, we lost 80 million. Hoorah, we're doing something good. Oh, you only lost 80 million this year. And Vince turns around. Vince didn't buy WCW. Vince bought the video. He bought the library, the tapes. And he bought them for like $4 million bucks. He bought an $80 million losing company for $4 million. He said, I don't want your ring trucks. I don't want your rings. I don't want any of that stuff. I'm not buying that.
So back to WWE in the, I guess it would have been around 97 maybe? Or
Yeah,
96.
I'd been back for one Royal Rumble or something, and then they called me back, and I did the Billy Gunn thing. I did commentary for a while with Lawler and Ross, and that commentary wasn't so bad, but Vince Russo was in charge backstage then, and they brought me back to do the search for the next greatest Intercontinental Champion, and for 4 months I couldn't find one, which drug on forever.
Everyone remembers the search.
The search went forever, but then finally, they said, okay, we got the guy for you. It's Billy Gunn. So I go to Billy and I said, Billy, what have they been doing with you out here? He said, I've been doing jobs for Rocky and Flash Funk, that's The Rock, every night in the first match for the last year. I said, well, that's really great. I don't know what we can do here. Then Jim Ross says, we really need to get him over. I want you to go on the road in the house shows. I said, Jim, working the first match with Flash Funk and The Rock ain't going to get him over. He's got to get over on TV. You put the guy over on TV, Jim, you know that. He says, well, that's not my call. I said, well, how am I going to be paid? I'm not on contract. He says, well, managers don't get paid like wrestlers. He said, but call me on Monday. I said, yeah, right. So I gave my notice.
So did you really have anything against Billy Gunn? Or
No.
You thought it was just kind of a...
It was something that didn't work. Billy didn't want to do it, and he knew it wouldn't work because he was trying to establish himself as a single wrestler because he'd been in a tag so long. And for me to be out there in this flashy outfit, they got him dressed in blue jeans again with it was not good for either one of us.
Was that one of Vince Russo's creations?
I don't know who came up with it. Their original idea was to have Savio Vega.
Which would have made even less sense.
Yes. And Savio was excited about it. I think to this day, Savio might think that I heard about it and went to him and told him I don't want Savio, but Savio might have been better. He wasn't getting
had a good attitude.
He wasn't getting beat every night on the first match. He was with Los Barricos at the time, and they were doing pretty good.
What was the biggest difference in WWE, the locker room, and the whole atmosphere in the WWE that time around as opposed to the 80s and early 90s?
Totally different. I mean, it was not completely different as it is now. It was different though in the fact that guys had contracts. There wasn't as much camaraderie as we had. It was still pretty much the same, but I think the contract situation, the influence of WCW had brought a change of atmosphere because they had some WCW guys there then. So there was a WCW kind of an influence of, hey, they give us a script, we go out and read it. We study and we go do it. It wasn't as much off-the-cuff camaraderie fun that we had. Nowadays, it's terrible, I guess.
And by this point, Bret Hart would have been one of their top guys, if not the top.
Yeah. By then, Bret had a private locker room. He didn't dress with the wrestlers anymore. He's Bret. He's the world's champion. I don't understand this private locker room stuff. Because you become world champion, you can't talk to the wrestlers anymore.
And in the 1997 Survivor Series, there was a documentary done on Bret Hart around that time. Got pretty known, and you're in the documentary actually in the limo with Bret and hanging around Bret during this time. Did you actually have a role at that Survivor Series in any capacity?
Nothing. No role at all, other than sit there all day thinking they were going to do something. They told me, we got an interview segment for you coming up, or we're going to use you on commentary. Nope, we got you scratched. Finally, just before Bret and Shawn went out for their match, I was sitting beside Jim, and Jim was here. Bret was beside Jim, I think, and Davey Boy and Undertaker and Paul Bearer and Rick Rude. The locker room was full of guys, and I had no inkling, no knowing of anything what was going to happen. And then the Montreal screw job, and I was already in my rental-car going to Ottawa.
Were you one of the ones that refused to work the next night in Ottawa?
Oh, of course, I didn't know anything about it. And plus, I didn't have a contract. Well, who am I going to refuse? They didn't even use me that night in Ottawa. I hung.
So you were one of the ones willing to work that night.
Well, yeah, I didn't understand that. I'm not going to work because,
What's your opinion on the whole Bret Hart thing? Montreal screwed job.
I think Bret's motives were right in his opinion because I had refused doing jobs myself for people, not because it was personal, but it was a business decision for me, and obviously it was a little bit personal and a business decision for him. So I don't blame him in that respect. I don't blame Vince for the way Vince handled it because Vince had to protect his company, and I think any other promoter in that position would have done it. I think for Shawn Michaels and some people to know and keep it a secret, if they were going to remain loyal to the company, then I don't blame them for doing it because they had to remain loyal. And Bret already had a good deal going to WCW. There was no reason to cause any confusion. He was getting a huge, huge deal. And it wasn't going to affect his deal there at all.
Do you think WCW dropped the ball with Bret Hart when they got him?
I think they dropped the ball with a lot of guys, and Bret just happened to fall in that category. I think the Ultimate Warrior came in. They dropped the ball with him. They dropped the ball with Davey Boy when they brought him in because him and Bret went in about the same time. There's been numerous guys that they brought in there that they totally mishandled and didn't. Look, if a guy knows what he can do and he's been doing it for another company, let him go out there and do it. Would Hogan have been instrumental in maybe Bret not getting the push that he maybe could have used and done very good in WCW? We don't know. We'll never know that because Bret got injured and had to leave and everything.
So you spent the next 10 years after your WCW departure on the independents, and then in 2008 you made a brief return to WWE. I believe you were in the Royal Rumble again around that time.
Yeah, that's the one where Kane whacked me with a guitar.
And then that led, later on, they used you again with this whole thing with Santino and the Honkameter. Now, before they started doing that whole Honkameter, did they tell you there was going to be something, or were you just watching it?
No, I didn't know anything about it till some of the wrestling fans had sent me a Facebook or an email or something saying, have you seen what they're doing with this Honkameter thing with Santino Marella? And I said, no, what are they doing? Well, it's on YouTube. Look at this. So I looked at it, and I said, that's interesting. What are they trying to do, make fun of me? Or are they really trying to do something? So I took it in the beginning as they were trying to make fun of me. So the first time they called, I said, I've looked at it, and I kind of don't understand it, and I'm not sure what you guys want to do. I think I'll pass. And I waited, and I looked at it again about 2 weeks later, and I called them back. I said, I've looked at it some more, and I think there's something there. And it was, but they only let it go for that one pay-per-view and one Raw show, and then he had him lose to Steve Regal in England 3 days later in 13 seconds.
Is there a reason why you wrestled in your jumpsuit that night when you wrestled Santino?
That's just how they had it set up to not even take the jumpsuit off. It was to be that short, that fast.
So you think they probably could have done a little run with that angle for all the effort they put into promoting the whole Honkameter thing?
Yeah, for all that time and effort they put into that for like 9 or 10 weeks or 12 weeks. And then all of a sudden, the finish we did where I heard she pulls my leg and they get DQ'd was okay. And then the following night on Raw, I didn't beat him, but there was another screwy little finish. And then he loses, like I said, 3 or 4 days later in England to Steve Regal and loses the belt. After all that time, I even told Pat Patterson. I told Pat when we were in not here in Phoenix for Cyber Sunday, but the following night down in Tucson, at the Raw taping, I told Pat, I said, you know, Pat, there's really something here. What I would like to do, if you guys want to run it by Vince, is what would be good, let's run this thing to WrestleMania and let me pass the torch on to that. This kid's really good. He says, yeah, he's fantastic. He said, let me talk to him and see what they want to do. He said, I don't have a lot of influence here anymore, but, you know, I mean, he's the only one I could talk. He's the only one I knew. I didn't know John Laurinaitis. I didn't know any of those office people to go to them. But I really thought they did drop the ball, and it wasn't on that they dropped it on me. I think they dropped it on this Santino kid because he's a really, really good talent, and he deserved, after, like you said, they waste all this time and effort, and all we get out of it is one little measly 30-second spot on a pay-per-view and a 2-minute little match for Raw the next night. That was it.
So you were back for that very brief run.
Very brief. Yeah, very brief.
What's your opinion on WWE? It's pretty much the same now compared to then, talent-wise. Do you think there's a bright future for wrestling and WWE in general, or do you think it's going to continue the downward swing just because of the lack of talent that's really been polished and storylines that I guess you could say are kind of unattractive to most longtime wrestling fans?
Well, it goes back to the Santino thing, and why they would put that time and effort into something and then just stop it is what they're doing now. And I'm not the only one that says this. I was reading an interview where Conan had said the same thing. They're not giving the undercard guys enough time to get themselves established. All of a sudden, they bring a guy in, they keep him down in a training camp for a year, 2 years, bring him up to the main roster, put him out on TV, give him some gimmick that he goes out and tries to do. 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 8 weeks later, you never see the guy again. Or he comes back 6 months later with a totally new gimmick. You have to give them time to develop their character. Characters are not developed at a wrestling school. I didn't develop my character at a wrestling school. I developed my character over time, over miles and miles on the highway, talking to older wrestlers, watching wrestling. The biggest problem they have now is some of those young fellas and girls, they're not fans of wrestling. They are fans of a television show named Raw.
And do you think some of the wrestlers today that are getting pushes and kind of getting the jobs, being hired from almost no training, do you think they really appreciate the veterans and the spots that they have in the business?
I don't think so. I don't think they do because they've not had to. Now, the travel schedule in WWE is still grueling by any means, but not as grueling as it was. I mean, 120 days I can live with very easily. But no, I don't. I think there's a respect level that's missing there. But you have guys like a Randy Orton and you have the John Cenas that did spend time in a training school with some veterans. And the old crew is almost gone now. Undertaker, who knows, by the time people see this, he might be gone. Shawn's gone. Brett's not around. Kane will be gone soon. All the old crew that came along after myself 15, 18, 20 years ago, they're not around anymore. The business is not the same, and Vince told me that 20 years ago. He said, Wayne, they don't have to pay their dues anymore. The business has changed.
And actually it was in 2008, around the same time of your WWE return, you had an accident while you were somewhere in the Maritimes in Canada. A lot of people have seen it. Can you explain what exactly you were trying to do and what the accident was?
Well, for the people who haven't seen it, I hope you guys can get the clip. I was in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, for all of you Canadian content, and for you Americans, this is way up in the Maritimes, up in the islands near the ocean, and beautiful place, beautiful city. We had went to a Boston Pizza to do an autograph signing from 3 to 5 that day before the matches in Charlottetown, and the promoter, Cowboy Mike Hughes, who also wrestled, had a good house that night. He was expecting 600-700 people. So we went out and did this promo stuff and signed autographs at this Boston Pizza. Had some one slice of pizza and I had one glass of beer. And the manager wanted to get all his staff come out front in the parking lot. And it's 5 to 5. We're going to leave and go straight to the building for 7 o'clock start. He says, I have these 2 guitars. If you don't mind, can we just get a photo op of us banging the guitars together? And the guitars were quite heavy. And for all the fans out there right now, and for all the wrestlers and for any athlete or for anyone, if you think it's not right and you know in your mind, I really shouldn't do this, don't do it. I broke my own rule. My rule has always been, and I've told kids in seminars and everywhere, if you don't think you can do it, don't do it. And I told the guy, I said, these guitars are kind of heavy and everything. What do you want to do? He said, just hold it out there. We'll smash them together and they'll take a photo of it. Little did I know that I'm holding this thing like I'm working with it, like very gently. I'm holding it like I would my girlfriend or my rat or my wife. So anyway, this guy, the only thing I remember is his eyes got the biggest saucers, and he took 1.5 steps, like the biggest slap shot that anybody could hit from center ice, and swung this guitar, and that's all I remember is him coming toward me. Bam! I dropped the guitar, and not with the best language, I said, I have to go to the hospital. And my finger was torn from the top of this joint all the way around to the back and was hanging by this little piece of meat. I've never been in the hospital in my life other than, I guess, when I was born. Never. Other than to visit somebody and to see one of my children born and to see my second child born. That's been it. Luckily, Mike Hughes, who the promoter was, they stuck my hand in a bag of ice right away, took me not too far away to the hospital in Charlottetown, and Mike had been part of the emergency management and he's like a nurse that goes and helps on emergencies, volunteer. He got me in the back door of the hospital because he knew the doctor on duty that day, called to find out, got me in the back. Doctor told the nurse, he said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Only Mike and the doctor and me were in there. Stitches me up, sends me on my merry way. I went to the building. I couldn't wrestle, but I managed. I showed up. Some of the fans were there. They knew what happened. So it wasn't a fake injury by any means because it's fake wrestling we talk about. My hand got it this big. Luckily, it didn't get infected, but it was the stupidest stunt I ever did. And it wasn't wrestling involved. It was a stupid stunt. That way you can cut in and say, let us show you the stupid stunt.
All right. You ready for this? 1, 2, 3. Jesus! Oh, fuck.
You've been wrestling for myself, Devin Nicholson, Hannibal, for many years now, since about 2007. How do you like working for me in general?
Working for Hannibal, or Devin Nicholson is the promoter on record. Hannibal is your ring name. It's always been something different. It's always been uniquely different, whether it be the show we had in Cochrane, Alberta, or the one that we had in Calgary, where it got out of hand there with those activities that I had before I got to the matches, and then my wife being there too. That was my fault, not yours. But then we get over to different places in Ontario and different places around Canada where you promote, and it's always been uniquely different. And you've always given me good opponents and everything, and not guys I had to go out and struggle with or had to, have altercations in the ring. And we were, I guess the one that I remember the most is the one with you and Leaping Lanny Poffo. And I don't know what transpired out in the ring and why it happened, but backstage, and I hope
What happened was, it was really stupid. I didn't know his luggage was lost. And Lanny, sometimes he wrestles without boots. Sometimes he wrestles in different outfits. I didn't realize the shirt he was wearing was his only shirt. So I ripped the shirt off in the match and chopped him. He told me I could be rough with him in the match, but I guess he didn't expect. But the match got a little out of hand.
Well,
But he was mostly, I guess, a little angry about the shirt.
I've seen you be rough with some people before, and I didn't want that roughness myself. And in fact, the last time I was around you, I think you gave me a chop in the elevator. We were going up to our rooms, and I was kind of like pinned in this 4x4 room elevator, and I couldn't get out while you were doing your chops on me. But to give Lanny a chop, I wouldn't have understood that. But if he said he wanted it, and for you to, rip his only shirt, and you didn't know that. But then when it came backstage is when I heard all the altercation, and you know what? It scared the heck out of some of those kids in the locker room. I thought, what the heck is going on? These guys are yelling and screaming at each other, and then it breaks out in the locker room, and you guys are down on the floor. And Lanny's a friend of mine, and I know that you can get carried away yourself and get a little bit, disturbed about things. And it was just a bad situation because I didn't know if I should, grab you as the promoter and as a wrestler that you are, or, take sides with Lanny. So I kind of just let it play out like it did, but I wasn't. I mean, I didn't like it. I really didn't like what happened. I didn't like how it all transpired and it all. But I hope to never see it again.
What's your opinion of Abdullah the Butcher as a wrestler?
I don't think he ever learned how to be a wrestler. What he did was not wrestling. I mean, to come out and jump a guy and start beating on him and then take his fork out of his pants and start jabbing a guy with the fork, and the guy's bleeding everywhere, then he's bleeding everywhere, then he drops his elbow, which his whole body covers the guy, and it's a free-for-all brawl. That's not being a pro wrestler. That's being a brawler. That now I guess he doesn't even get in the ring anymore. And I've seen matches a couple of years ago where he started the match right from the locker room.
Now in a match with Abdullah, I mean, is he really from the Sudan, and is he really forking his opponents?
No, he's not really from the Sudan, and he was supposed to be on all his interviews. He never talked, which was what he did. He was silent and always had a manager to talk for him. And then he'd go out in the restaurants. We'd go out in Puerto Rico somewhere. When he was there, he's talking to everybody. He's wearing jewelry. He's got his jewelry on. He's got his big belt buckle on, and he's just saying everything to everybody. But yet they see him on TV the day before, and he's not talking, and he's from the Sudan. No, he's from Windsor, Ontario or somewhere in Canada, and he came over to Detroit, and that's where he broke in. And he broke in trying to emulate or be like the original Sheik from Detroit, and this original Sheik never wrestled either. He carried the fork and jabbed people. Did he jab them? I'm sure he might have. I mean, there's probably some guys floating around that can say, yeah, he jabbed me with a fork and he jabbed me really hard.
Should I have expected when I wrestled Abdullah, knowing that pro wrestling is an athletic performance, should I have expected going into that match that I would be cut by him and hurt for real?
You never expect someone to start taking a blade and or razor blade that they use on themselves or wherever it might have come from, start using it on you. I mean, it happened to me a couple of times in my career, but once I found out, well, this is not the right thing for me to be doing, I wouldn't let it happen anymore.
Is it normal practice in a pro wrestling match for someone to cut someone else with a blade that is unsanitary?
It's not. No, it was never a normal practice at all by any means.
Especially in this day and age.
Well, in this day and age, yeah, it's one of those things where I definitely wouldn't want somebody doing that to me, and if they did, I'd be quite upset.
Would you see something like that happen in WWE?
No. If there's any bleeding, it would be because I saw not so long ago some guy was actually hit over the head with a chair, and the chair maybe turned sideways or something, and he did get an abrasion on his head that did bleed.
Should you ever expect the risk of death going into a professional wrestling match?
No, you shouldn't expect it.
Now, why do you think WWE put Abdullah the Butcher in the Hall of Fame?
I don't know that reason other than the fact that he's in Atlanta, and but they didn't have to buy a plane ticket, and he would have wanted a first class ticket, and he would have wanted a valet to come along, and I never understood that one. That was the one that got me, but there again, I didn't understand Mil Mascaras either. So they've done some things that I don't understand. I don't know why they would do it. And then knowing his background and how unappreciative he is of the business itself, why they would have picked him, I don't know.
Did you hear the interview that Abdullah did where he said he basically gave away his Hall of Fame ring as soon as he got off the stage?
I did see that. And to me, to say, well, after 50 years in the business, now they're going to put me in a Hall of Fame? Why didn't they do it 30 years ago? Well, they didn't have a Hall of Fame 30 years ago. It's not like other sports. This is an entertainment type sport. So a Hall of Fame in reality in WWE is more or less a TV show, and you're getting a payday. And you're getting a ring. So then you can show everybody in your restaurant or wherever you go your nice ring. And what do? You give it away. Well, if you give it gave it to his brother. If that's what you want to do with the ring, then fine. You can do with it what you want. I think it's a bit disrespectful to do it right away. I mean, there's been guys that pawn their rings. There's been guys that's auction their rings and things of that nature, but it's been because they really needed to do it. I mean, they needed money, and this was one way to get it. And if you don't have any, obviously it touched his heart because he did an interview about it. But I know some people that have given away or auctioned off their equipment, same as me. I don't have any sentimental ties to the business. I love the business, but I don't keep trophies of things that's sentimental to me. If I can make a buck off of them, I'd sell them. Especially if I needed the money. I mean, every time I've needed some money, I try to put something on auction. But for him then to turn around and say it was disrespectful for them to have him at that point in his career. Hey, at that point in his career, he got a payday for doing nothing. And then he complained. They said, hey, you got to be here tonight for this thing, and then tomorrow you got to show up for the WrestleMania. And I'm burping, excuse me. You got to show up tomorrow for the WrestleMania. For what I understand, from what I heard, he told them, hey, yeah, that's two times I got to be here. I got to be paid twice. They said, no, the deal is you come for this tonight and you got to be back tomorrow. I wouldn't have put up with it. I'd have said, look, if you don't like it, you don't even have to be on the Hall of Fame tonight. Or you can be on, we'll give you a payday, you get the car, we send you home.
What did you hear that he was telling some of the other legends in the dressing room the night of the Hall of Fame?
Oh, the word I heard was Johnny Laurinaitis came in and was telling everyone, like he always does, because I've been there for one of those Hall of Fame things. He comes in and kind of tells everyone, here's what the deal is, here's how we're doing it, this is what we want, this is what we expect, and this is how Vince wants it done. And then he spoke up and said, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Come in here telling us what to do. I've been around 50 years. This guy's been around 30 years. This guy's been around 40 years. This guy's been around 25 years. This guy ain't done anything. What's he doing telling us what to do? Who are you to tell us what to do? It was kind of embarrassing for Johnny, I'm sure. And there again, Johnny was not in a position to chastise or to slap an old-timer on his hand, but he had every right to go and tell Vince or for himself alone, say, well, Abby, if you got a problem, I'm glad to take you down to Vince's office. You can hash it out with him. And I know what Vince would have said. Abby, if you don't want to do it, there's a car waiting. You can go back to your restaurant.
And you were saying you actually ran out of food that weekend.
Yeah, from what I understand, the biggest weekend you're ever going to have at your restaurant, the biggest weekend you're ever going to have, it's the Super Bowl of wrestling. There's 90,000 people in town for this. And they're all coming from all over the world. They've heard about Abdullah Butcher's barbecued rib restaurant and Asian food. And what does he do? He runs out of food first day.
So do you think he
would have made more money in his restaurant that weekend than he made for the Hall of Fame?
Exactly. So you think overall WrestleMania weekend, he would have made a good deal of money because of WrestleMania?
I wish I'd had a restaurant down there. I thought about going and setting up a hotel room just to sign autographs on my own. Well, I did that before too.
Let's go back in time a bit to the 2009 Hall of Fame. How did that end up with you inducting Coco B, where there have been strong rumors that year that you were actually going to be inducted that year? Yeah,
they WWE just called out of the blue, and it was John Laurinaitis called and asked me. He said, we're going to induct Coco into the Hall of Fame down in Houston. He said, I really pushed for you to get in, but, it's not my call. But we thought you'd be a perfect person to come in and induct him. I said, well, gosh, I'd love to. He said, okay, we'll set it all up. I'll put you in touch with travel and get everything worked out. And he said, like I said, we want you in the Hall of Fame. It's just one of those times that it didn't work out this time. I said, no problem. I'll be glad to do it for Coco. And then one of the writers called me and they said, you're inducting Coco? Yes, I am. They said, well, do you need a script? We need to write you a script for this? I said, I've known a guy for 35 years. We started in the business together. I don't need a script. They said, can you do it in 3 minutes? I said, sure I can. And I felt honored to go and do it for Coco, because who else could have went up there and told the story of me and him breaking into business together in a barn and drinking out of the same horse trough as the horses and the cows and doing the things that we had to do, and he made it the same as he made it as a Birdman. It was his night. It wasn't a night for me to shine, and I gave the platform to him. I wouldn't have wanted somebody like Dusty Rhodes inducting me, because he's going to go out there, hey, baby, we're going to the pay window, baby. He's going to try to take the spotlight away.
Now, let's get into the subject of a small southern wrestling company called TNA.
Are they still in business?
Why do you think that they've been getting the same rating forever, despite everything?
I'll tell you why. Because it's a cheesy looking production. It doesn't look anything near like the production of WCW or WWE. I mean, WCW had a good production, but it was not up to par with what WWE was producing. And I think that in the long run, their production is what cost them a lot, the viewership. This show is taped in front of a small audience that gets in free. They're told when to yell, when to scream. They get in free. It's down in the studio in Orlando. Their ratings have not changed significantly since they opened. I was reading, finally someone put not their pay-per-view numbers out, but they did put their TV ratings out. They put their house show ratings from a few weeks ago. They drew 400 in one town, 600 in the other. Now you and I, we outdrew them like by 100 people.
The last event I actually promoted, I drew 1,200 fans with one star, Scott Steiner, who they fought.
Okay, you drew 1,200 on this was your retirement show that I was on, and we outdrew them.
We drew 600 that night.
And they drew like 400 with all their stars about 60 or 80 miles away. And then you came back, draw 1,200, they draw 600.
Me wrestling with just Scott Steiner
Right.
as the star.
And it's one of their guys.
Yeah.
It was one of their guys at one time.
They let go.
But they didn't use him on their road shows. Then they bring all their stars out on the road show, and I see where they have Sting and they have all these guys over in Baltimore or in Maryland somewhere. They drew 600 people.
What is your opinion of Dixie Carter?
I don't know her, so I can't judge her on anything but what she has a track record on, and obviously she's getting money from her parents. She might be getting some money now from the TV, from whatever TV channel they're on or network, but I guess she has this fascination, or she likes pro wrestling, and she decided to open a company not knowing how to run a company. And she has now, over the period of time, I still don't know how they're in business. I really don't know. But she hires Eric Bischoff, she hired Vince Russo, she's hired a bunch of these people who have been detrimental to other companies. Listen, if they have a track record of being detrimental to other companies, then do you think they're going to change? They're just obvious. It's like Scott Steiner said. Are they going to go? They going to grow brains all of a sudden?
Has Eric Bischoff helped TNA? This kind of goes in from the last question.
The only thing I think he could have helped them with might have been getting them the TV deal, because he had some other projects that he was pitching to them, and he had Hulk Hogan. And with having Hogan is an easy way to get a TV deal, because you got the biggest name in the business, even though he's not wrestling.
Is everything cool with you and Hogan now, for the most part?
As far as I know, we don't have no issues, none at all, because he's not around Bubba the Love Sponge anymore. Bubba's dropped out of sight.
What's your opinion of Kurt Angle taking an entire year, taking publicity away from real athletes, training for the U.S. Olympic trials, and saying for a year that he was going to make the 2012 U.S. Olympic team, then changing it to saying he was going to make an alternate, then finally quitting, saying due to injury, and wrestling that very same weekend on a TNA pay-per-view, and he's continued to wrestle on house shows, as you said, in front of 400 people since then with this supposedly serious injury.
I've only been around Kurt a very short time. We don't really know each other at all other than hello. I respect everything he's done in amateur wrestling and in professional wrestling. He put a good spin on that to say he was going to train for the Olympics, which I think us in the business always knew that he's not in physical condition to train for the Olympics or even be part of it. It was a good grand gesture. It got some buzz. It got some little media coverage, not a whole lot, but he's a good spin doctor.
So you think basically everyone kind of looks at pro wrestling not as a real sport now? So
I think some of the amateurs that's come over into pro wrestling has given us a little bit more legitimacy as being, tougher and harder than what it's always been thought of by the people that's not wrestling fans or the amateur wrestling world. I think there's a bigger understanding of what we do now and how we do it with the amateur wrestling world and the UFC guys and the MMA guys, because there's been a crossover, not with just Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn. There's been a few other guys that's tried it.
Okay, so the last few questions: Are you happy with all of your wrestling accomplishments?
Yeah, I don't look back on anything and say, I wish. The only thing is I could have been, like I said earlier, a little bit more politically correct, probably in some of my dealings with promoters and maybe some of my dealings with some of the young guys in the locker room now. I kind of get on them a little bit about all this crazy nonsense they go out and do, this death-defying stunts that they do. That's not even pro wrestling. That's this acrobatic stuff they do. I sometimes should probably just, as my wife used to say, zip it. But no, I wish I would have maybe my career it's still going good, but I really wish I would have gotten into one of those big contracts and contributed to a company and made all that money. But only with money comes more problems, and I'm happy where I'm at.
What's your biggest fear?
Growing old, getting hurt, seriously injured, phone not ringing for anybody to book me anymore. I think that's when my depression would set in, if I have to sit home and now the phone doesn't ring. And after a couple of years, now I've sold everything on eBay and I don't have anything left. So I guess I could do like Jake, show up in tennis shoes with Zubaz on.
And finally, how do you want to be remembered?
The greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. No, that's all nonsense. Just as a hard-working guy that went out and did his job like it was supposed to be done. Sometimes I did it better than I did it other times, but that's it. I'm not a superstar by any means. I'm an ordinary wrestler that shows up and does his job. I go out and entertain the people. I want to be remembered as an entertainer, not as a great pro wrestler, because I've never been given that accolade anywhere as a great pro wrestler. I want to be remembered, hey, that SOB was a darn good entertainer.
And just quickly, one of the reasons why you did the bit of the more entertainment style in your later years is because you've actually had a ridiculous number of matches, probably far more matches than a lot of your co-workers.
Yeah.
From the 80s, you're still regularly wrestling almost every weekend.
I've had probably, 5,000 matches. I mean, I'm to the point in my career now where I wish that I could find that one guy that I could go out and have a match like I had 20 years ago, 15 years ago. But out here on the independent circuit that I do, It's very difficult because the young fellows aren't trained the way I was. I don't trust them because I don't know who trained them. A lot of times on the independents, the actual wrestling ring is broken, it's torn up, it's nails sticking out of the boards. The smoke machine doesn't work, the microphone doesn't work, the curtains fall down. I have to work with the tools that's given me for that day.
And if I was able to get cured of hepatitis C in the next few years, do you think it would be in WWE's best interest to give me another shot?
That's their call, Devin, and it's one of those things that we won't ever know until it happens. And to speculate on what they do and how they do it is what it is, pure speculation. That would be, it would be like you saying, here's a needle and I'm going to throw it over here in a haystack. Can you find it for me? I don't know what they're looking for and when they're looking for it and how they're looking for it. Would it be in their best interest to do a lot of things? Probably. Sometimes probably not. They see the world different than you and I. They don't see it the same way we see it. They never have, they never will.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people in the office, and you never know who's going to be in that.
You don't know who's going to be the next guy. Who knows? I might be the next booker there, and I'd give you a shot if he's...
Yeah. Well, you never know.
You never know. You might be the next guy head of talent relations down in TNA, and you can say, look, he really don't hate you guys that bad. He's a good guy. For the Lanny Poffos DVD, I can only say this. I know he has some things he does and some things he doesn't do. He's not a big drinker. He's not a smoker. He's not a drug abuser. But he does other things that I've heard about. I've never seen it. I understand that he admits to this thing that he does. My friend Don Fargo one time, 25, 30 years ago, we're driving down a highway and we mentioned something about Lanny and his extraordinary thing that he can do with his human body. And Fargo said, I wonder if he's a real man. And me being a young kid in the business, I said, what do you mean a real man? Well, a real man would stay there and take it, or does he pull away at the last minute? I didn't understand that till later on in life, but that's very uniquely different to have a philosophy of, is he a real man by doing that, or would he, I love Lanny to death, and he has a million stories, and the DVD can only cover just a few of them.
All right. Superstar Billy Graham.
What can I say about the superstar? He's been a million places and done a million things, and he went from some young kid here in Arizona playing football and weightlifting to being in pro football and going up and getting stretched by Stu Hart, and then Billy's been on the forefront of bodybuilding with Arnold Schwarzenegger and muscle magazines. When I was a kid, trying to break into the wrestling business, I would see Billy on the cover of the magazines and see that body he had, and then to go through all the health problems that he's gone through and still be out here kicking and being superstar Billy Graham is really something fascinating, and another great guy that I have nothing but admiration for. We don't spend a lot of time together. We never did. We were just saw each other in passing, but we knew the same people, and we knew how bad some of those people were and how good some of the others were.
Did he kind of coin the phrase superstar for a professional wrestler? Was he the first person to use that word?
As far as I know, yes, he was. And to say superstar Billy Graham, a lot of people who weren't in the wrestling business thought it was the actual preacher Billy Graham, but it wasn't. It was just a name that the Grahams gave him, and he picked it up and went with superstar, and it's worked very well for him. I mean, it's a household name. When you say superstar Billy Graham, everyone in the wrestling business, everyone that's a fan of pro wrestling for the last 40 years knows superstar Billy Graham.
And Scott Steiner.
Oh, what can I say about Scotty? He's I'll tell you what, Big Papa Pump. I mean, the live freak show, and that's what Scotty's the greatest guy. When you really, he's not the easiest guy in the world to get to know by any means, but when you get to know him, he is a sweethearted person, a gentleman, a great amateur wrestler that mixed in his amateur style when him and his brother were a tag team, and I was like, I'd been in the business for like 10 years. I went, I don't want to be booked against those guys, and I sure don't want that Frankensteiner. But I mean, what a body on him. I mean, he's built that body up, and you know, he sometimes he reminds me of a young superstar Billy Graham. Real quick, for the Lanny Poffo DVD, let me say this, and Lanny will remember this. Life is a bed of roses, but you got to watch out for the pricks.